her skin glistening in the rays of attraction. At first I felt resentment, wondering how she could have cheated on me like that. But gradually, the feelings of frustration were replaced by something much more complex. My wife became a mystery to me, even though I had known her all my life. I tried to understand what she was feeling, what forces were pushing her to cheat. I looked into her eyes, and my own feelings began to change. I began to see not only cheating, but passion, desire, sincerity. I saw her opening herself up to other men, giving herself over to her feelings, and surprisingly, I could not remain indifferent to this sight. My feelings became more and more complex and contradictory. I watched Sarah fall into passion as she lost herself in the arms of other men, and I was not only not offended by it, but attracted to it. I saw how she found pleasure in it, how it brought her fulfillment, and my love for her grew stronger. I couldn't contain my feelings. I wanted to observe her, to understand what drove her to do such things and what feelings she had. My wife became a mystery to me, and I decided to solve this mystery. I soon realized that my love for her was stronger than ever. I couldn't stop watching her. We discussed our feelings and desires, and it turned out that she was experiencing something similar as well. We decided that cheating and watching had become part of our intimate lives. Thus began our new chapter, where we were able to open the doors to each other into a world of passion and attraction, where the feelings of love were stronger than ever. We realized that love can be mysterious and unpredictable, but it can overcome any challenge. It was our journey of understanding, reconciliation, of renewed passion that allowed us to move past cheating and strengthen our relationship. We moved to a new stage in our lives where passion and attraction became an unshakable part of our history together. We did not hide our desires and fears, but rather shared them openly. This became a source of endless inspiration for us. We realized that love is a complex and multifaceted feeling, and it can be expressed in different ways. Our experience became a kind of exploration of human emotions and feelings. We got to know each other again, discovering new sides of our personalities and passions. Our days became brighter, our nights became hotter, and our bonds strengthened. We experienced cheating, and it brought us something we never would have expected. We realized that love and passion can reside alongside cheating, and this story became part of our unique love. And now, as I think back on this period of our lives, I realize that sometimes we need to let our feelings lead us, opening new horizons in love. Our experience changed us, making our relationship stronger than ever. We enriched each other, gaining a deeper understanding of our feelings and passions. This story is about how we survived cheating and how love proved stronger than all barriers. Our hearts beat in unison, and we are ready to go through any trials together. We found the freedom to be ourselves while being closer to each other than ever before. This story is about how love can overcome everything, including betrayal, and remain eternal. When I entered the house, I heard voices from the bedroom. My heart raced, and I headed in that direction. What I saw stunned me. Emily was embracing my friend David. Their kisses were passionate, and I couldn't look away. My initial desire was to separate them, but suddenly I felt something holding me back. Instead of an explosion, I remained in place, observing this unexpected scene. My feelings began to change dramatically. Jealousy and disappointment gave way to something I couldn't understand. I saw Emily and David fall into passion, and it drew me in rather than repelled me. My reactions were unpredictable and contradictory. Mysterious awakening. My life seemed ordinary and predictable until something happened that turned it upside down. My name is Jason, and I lived in a small American town where days flowed calmly and measuredly. My life was perfect. I had a career, a home, and a beautiful wife, Emily. Emily and I met in college, and from the first moment we met, I knew there was something special between us. She was a beautiful woman with mysterious eyes and sensual lips. Our first years were full of passion and falling in love. We spent days walking through parks and beaches, sharing our dreams and desires. I realized that Emily was the woman of my dreams. When the time came, I proposed to her. Our wedding was a true fairy tale where every detail was infused with our love and passion. But as time went on, routine and daily life began to creep into our lives. We became immersed in work, had financial worries, and our schedules began to separate us. Emily spent more time with her girlfriends, and I was consumed with my career. The passion and attraction disappeared, replaced by monotony. Everything changed the day I accidentally came home from work earlier than I had planned. I wanted to surprise Emily and spend an evening together, but my plans fell apart in an instant. When I entered the house, I heard voices from the bedroom. My heart raced, and I headed in that direction. What I saw stunned me. Emily was embracing my friend, David. Their kisses were passionate, and I couldn't look away. My initial desire was to separate them, but suddenly I felt something holding me back. Instead of an explosion, I remained in place, observing this unexpected scene. My feelings began to change dramatically. Jealousy and disappointment gave way to something I couldn't understand. I saw Emily and David fall into passion, and it drew me in rather than repelled me. My reactions were unpredictable and contradictory. I couldn't tear myself away from this scene, as if I were caught in the whirlwind of someone else's passion. Gradually, I understood that my wife was not just a wife, but a woman full of desires and feelings. I saw her enter a different world where there was no place for obligations and restraint. Emily and David became my secret passion. I couldn't understand why I didn't stop them, why I didn't leave the bedroom and start a fight. Instead, I watched and felt something changing within me. In the evening, I told Emily about what had happened. She was surprised by my reaction and fear of losing our connection, but to my amazement, she understood me. We began to discuss what this meant for us and what new horizons were opening in our relationship. From this experience, we understood that love could be much more complex than we had imagined. We decided that honest communication and understanding of each other were the keys not only to surviving an affair, but also to making it a part of our relationship. This marked the beginning of a new chapter in our life, where passion and attraction became an integral part of our relationship. We realized that love is much more complex than we thought, and it can manifest in the most unexpected ways and with various people. This experience helped us understand each other better and deeper, making our relationship even stronger and brighter. Now, Emily does what she wants, but allows me to observe. From this, our love becomes stronger and more profound. Conflicting feelings battled in my mind. On one hand, I was shattered by the betrayal, but on the other, I was incredibly curious and even aroused to watch her. Seeing her in such an ecstatic and carefree state evoked in me a feeling I couldn't fully understand. Perhaps it was a sense of rekindled passion or a desire to be the one who brings her such pleasure, even if I wasn't the only one. Each of their touches, each look they shared, was filled with the tenderness and passion I thought we had lost forever. And at the same time, watching this, I began to understand that my feelings for Lucy hadn't died. They were forgotten and locked away deep inside, under the weight of everyday life and routine. Seeing her like this, in full passion and vivacity, reawakened in me a desire I hadn't felt for many years. My name is Elias, and I live in a place where every sunset paints the sky in incredible colors, in a small American town. Here, among these tranquil streets and old maples, I met her, Lucy. It happened many years ago, during my carefree college days, when every new day seemed like a page from an unreal fairy tale. That night, when I first saw Lucy, everything was imbued with a spirit of freedom and carefreeness. A noisy party at a classmate's place was in full swing. Music, laughter, twinkling lights of garlands, and a faint smell of alcohol in the air. I stood at the threshold, immersing myself in the atmosphere of unrestrained fun, and then my gaze fell on her. She was laughing, and in her eyes played something incomprehensibly attractive, shrouded in the soft light of the lamps. Lucy's hair, red like the flame of an autumn bonfire, cascaded freely over her shoulders, She moved with ease and grace, as if floating among people, not touching the ground. Her laughter was a melody that was impossible to ignore, and her smile was magic, altering the world. I couldn't pull away, and my senses began to shift again. I watched as they kissed, as Jason touched her body, as she responded to him with passion. Instead of pulling out and making them stop, I stayed watching. In Willowbrook, a small American town where the days flowed calmly and measuredly, my life was a perfect bliss. Sarah and I had met while at university, and from the first time we met, there was something special between us. She was an amazingly beautiful woman, with burning eyes and sensual lips. She had that magic that attracts the eyes of all men. Our first years were full of attraction, passion, and falling in love. We spent a lot of time walking through parks and beaches, telling each other our fondest dreams and desires. I realized that Sarah was the woman of my dreams, and when the time came, I proposed to her. Our wedding was a true fairy tale where every detail was imbued with our love and passion. However, as time went on, routine and daily life began to creep into our lives. We became immersed in work, we had financial worries, and our work schedules began to separate us. Sarah spent more time with her girlfriends. I was consumed with my career. We were at a point where the passion was gone and monotony took its place. Everything changed the day I accidentally came home from work earlier than I had planned. I wanted to surprise her, but the surprise was for me. I saw her, my Sarah, in the arms of my best friend, Jason. The storm of feelings that started inside me was something unimaginable: anger, disappointment, but most importantly, curiosity. I couldn't look away, and my feelings began to shift again. I watched as they kissed, as Jason touched her body, as she responded to him with passion. Instead of pulling away and making them stop, I stayed watching. At first, it was pure curiosity. I wanted to understand what was pushing my wife to cheat, what feelings she was experiencing. Gradually, my feelings of anger and frustration gave way to something else. I began to see her not as a wife cheating on me, but as a woman with turbulent feelings and desires. It was like solving a puzzle. With each new peek, my feelings became more complicated. I couldn't take my eyes off Sarah, couldn't separate my eyes from this woman. Every time she changed her passions in front of another man, I saw something amazing in her, something that changed, blossomed before my eyes. I could see her sighing, her skin getting goosebumps, her skin glistening in the rays of attraction. At first, I felt resentment, wondering how she could have cheated on me like that. But gradually, the feelings of frustration were replaced by something much more complex. My wife became a mystery to me, even though I had known her all my life. I tried to understand what she was feeling, what forces were pushing her to cheat. I looked into her eyes, and my own feelings began to change. I began to see not only cheating, but passion, desire, sincerity. I saw her opening herself up to other men, giving herself over to her feelings, and surprisingly, I could not remain indifferent to this sight. My feelings became more and more complex and contradictory. I watched Sarah fall into passion as she lost herself in the arms of other men, and I was not only not offended by it, but attracted to it. I saw how she found pleasure in it, how it brought her fulfillment, and my love for her grew stronger. I couldn't contain my feelings. I wanted to observe her, to understand what drove her to do such things, and what feelings she had. My wife became a mystery to me, and I decided to solve this mystery. I soon realized that my love for her was stronger than ever. I couldn't stop watching her. We discussed our feelings and desires, and it turned out that she was experiencing something similar as well. We decided that cheating and watching had become part of our intimate lives. Thus began our new chapter, where we were able to open the doors to each other into a world of passion and attraction, where the feelings of love were stronger than ever. We realized that love can be mysterious and unpredictable, but it can overcome any challenge. It was our journey of understanding, reconciliation, of renewed passion that allowed us to move past cheating and strengthen our relationship. We moved to a new stage in our lives where passion and attraction became an unshakable part of our history together. We did not hide our desires and fears, but rather shared them openly. This became a source of endless inspiration for us. We realized that love is a complex and multifaceted feeling, and it can be expressed in different ways. Our experience became a kind of exploration of human emotions and feelings. We got to know each other again, discovering new sides of our personalities and passions. Our days became brighter, our nights became hotter, and our bond strengthened. We experienced cheating, and it brought us something we never would have expected. We realized that love and passion can reside alongside cheating, and this story became part of our unique love. And now, as I think back on this period of our lives, I realize that sometimes we need to let our feelings lead us, opening new horizons in love. Our experience changed us, making our relationship stronger than ever. We enriched each other, gaining a deeper understanding of our feelings and passions. This story is about how we survived cheating and how love proved stronger than all barriers. Our hearts beat in unison, and we are ready to go through any trials together. We found the freedom to be ourselves while being closer to each other than ever before. This story is about how love can overcome everything, including betrayal, and remain eternal. When I entered the house, I heard voices from the bedroom. My heart raced, and I headed in that direction. What I saw stunned me. Emily was embracing my friend David. Their kisses were passionate, and I couldn't look away. My initial desire was to separate them, but suddenly I felt something holding me back. Instead of an explosion, I remained in place, observing this unexpected scene. My feelings began to change dramatically. Jealousy and disappointment gave way to something I couldn't understand. I saw Emily and David fall into passion, and it drew me in rather than repelled me. My reactions were unpredictable and contradictory. Mysterious awakening. My life seemed ordinary and predictable until something happened that turned it upside down. My name is Jason, and I lived in a small American town where days flowed calmly and measuredly. My life was perfect. I had a career, a home, and a beautiful wife, Emily. Emily and I met in college, and from the first moment we met, I knew there was something special between us. She was a beautiful woman with mysterious eyes and sensual lips. Our first years were full of passion and falling in love. We spent days walking through parks and beaches, sharing our dreams and desires. I realized that Emily was the woman of my dreams. When the time came, I proposed to her. Our wedding was a true fairy tale where every detail was infused with our love and passion. But as time went on, routine and daily life began to creep into our lives. We became immersed in work, had financial worries, and our schedules began to separate us. Emily spent more time with her girlfriends, and I was consumed with my career. The passion and attraction disappeared, replaced by monotony. Everything changed the day I accidentally came home from work earlier than I had planned. I wanted to surprise Emily and spend an evening together, but my plans fell apart in an instant. When I entered the house, I heard voices from the bedroom. My heart raced, and I headed in that direction. What I saw stunned me. Emily was embracing my friend, David. Their kisses were passionate, and I couldn't look away. My initial desire was to separate them, but suddenly, I felt something holding me back. Instead of an explosion, I remained in place, observing this unexpected scene. My feelings began to change dramatically. Jealousy and disappointment gave way to something I couldn't understand. I saw Emily and David fall into passion, and it drew me in rather than repelled me. My reactions were unpredictable and contradictory. I couldn't tear myself away from this scene, as if I were caught in the whirlwind of someone else's passion. Gradually, I understood that my wife was not just a wife, but a woman full of desires and feelings. I saw her enter a different world where there was no place for obligations and restraint. Emily and David became my secret passion. I couldn't understand why I didn't stop them, why I didn't leave the bedroom and start a fight. Instead, I watched and felt something changing within me. In the evening, I told Emily about what had happened. She was surprised by my reaction and fear of losing our connection, but to my amazement, she understood me. We began to discuss what this meant for us and what new horizons were opening in our relationship. From this experience, we understood that love could be much more complex than we had imagined. We decided that honest communication and understanding of each other were the keys not only to surviving an affair, but also to making it a part of our relationship. This marked the beginning of a new chapter in our life, where passion and attraction became an integral part of our relationship. We realized that love is much more complex than we thought, and it can manifest in the most unexpected ways and with various people. This experience helped us understand each other better and deeper, making our relationship even stronger and brighter. Now, Emily does what she wants, but allows me to observe. From this, our love becomes stronger and more profound. Conflicting feelings battled in my mind. On one hand, I was shattered by the betrayal, but on the other, I was incredibly curious and even aroused to watch her. Seeing her in such an ecstatic and carefree state evoked in me a feeling I couldn't fully understand. Perhaps it was a sense of rekindled passion or a desire to be the one who brings her such pleasure, even if I wasn't the only one. Each of their touches, each look they shared, was filled with the tenderness and passion I thought we had lost forever, and at the same time, watching this, I began to understand that my feelings for Lucy hadn't died. They were forgotten and locked away deep inside, under the weight of everyday life and routine. Seeing her like this, in full passion and vivacity, reawakened in me a desire I hadn't felt for many years. My name is Elias, and I live in a place where every sunset paints the sky in incredible colors, in a small American town. Here, among these tranquil streets and old maples, I met her, Lucy. It happened many years ago, during my carefree college days, when every new day seemed like a page from an unreal fairy tale. That night, when I first saw Lucy, everything was imbued with a spirit of freedom and carefreeness. A noisy party at a classmate's place was in full swing. Music, laughter, twinkling lights of garlands, and a faint smell of alcohol in the air. I stood at the threshold, immersing myself in the atmosphere of unrestrained fun, and then my gaze fell on her. She was laughing, and in her eyes played something incomprehensibly attractive, shrouded in the soft light of the lamps. Lucy's hair, red like the flame of an autumn bonfire, cascaded freely over her shoulders. She moved with ease and grace, as if floating among people, not touching the ground. Her laughter was a melody that was impossible to ignore, and her smile was magic, altering the world around. At that moment, I felt my heart stop and then start again, but now in rhythm with her movements. I don't remember how I covered the distance between us, how I found the words for the first phrase. I only remember her surprised look, the sparkles of mirth in her eyes, and how she lightly touched my hand, accepting the drink I offered. I spent the entire evening in her company, listening to each of her words, absorbed by this sudden and inexplicable feeling. The wedding with Lucy was exactly as I had dreamed since childhood, although I didn't realize it until that moment. We chose an old church on the outskirts of the town, with stained glass windows that played with light, creating a halo around her as she walked down the aisle. Her dress was simple yet elegant, with a light train that followed her like a cloud. As she approached me, I felt my heart fill with warmth and happiness, as if I had found something priceless that I hadn't even been looking for. The first years of our life together were filled with joy and laughter. We often walked through the same streets where we first met, celebrated each anniversary at our favorite cafe, where we had our first lunch together. Her laughter was still a melody to my ears, and her smile continued to make my heart beat faster. But over time, as often happens, life began to introduce its adjustments. Work, career, daily cares, and responsibilities started to take more and more of our time and energy. Our evenings became quieter, and although we still loved each other, the passion and excitement of the early days gradually gave way to the calm flow of family life. I noticed how Lucy sometimes sighed, looking out the window, and I felt that I, too, missed those carefree days of our youth. From time to time, we tried to spice up our life with little adventures, but it wasn't the same, Missing was the spark that shone in her eyes when we first met, the smile she gave me when we sat in the cafe under the rain. We both felt that we had changed, and our feelings had also undergone changes. I began to think about where we were heading and what lay ahead for us. Was this a natural evolution of the relationship, or had we lost something important along the way? I caught myself missing Lucy, even though she was right beside me, and it scared me. I understood that something had to change, but I didn't know where to start. It's strange and bitter to realize that each day our intimate life with Lucy was becoming more distant and cold. What used to be passionate and inevitable had turned into a rare and obligatory act. I felt exhausted after long workdays, often just wanting to collapse into bed and forget everything in sleep. But it wasn't just fatigue to blame. Every time Lucy said she wasn't in the mood or was too tired, disappointment accumulated inside me. I was angry not only at her but at myself for not being able to arouse desire in her like before. This issue became a topic of our increasingly frequent arguments that seemed to arise out of nowhere. Sometimes I lay beside her, trying to understand the root of our problems, to return to the times when every touch sought a response, when every glance promised tenderness and passion, seemed impossible. I feared we would lose what had initially bound us. I feared we were no longer who we used to be and could never regain our former closeness. The arguments exacerbated the situation. Every time I tried to bring up this topic, Lucy dismissed it, saying these were temporary difficulties and everything would work out. But deep down, I felt it wasn't true. She became more withdrawn and even indifferent. In those moments, it felt like an insurmountable wall had risen between us, and I didn't know how to tear it down. This issue began to poison all aspects of our life. We talked less, laughed less. Even shared moments together now seemed more like a routine than a pleasure. I noticed that both of us were increasingly looking for excuses to leave the house, to immerse ourselves in work or meetings with friends, just to avoid confronting this tension within our walls. As I left the office earlier than usual, various thoughts about my future with Lucy swirled in my head. For the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of hope that we could change something. Arriving home, I immediately noticed something was off. The porch light was on, while Lucy was supposed to be at work. An inner voice warned me something was wrong, and instead of entering, I inexplicably moved towards the window. My heart pounded wildly as I crept up and cautiously looked inside through the curtains, and then my world collapsed. There on the bed, in an embrace, lay Lucy and my friend. They were naked, in the most intimate and close embrace. I froze in place, lost and shocked. Time seemed to slow down. Everything in my head screamed in despair and betrayal. Outside the window, where time seemed to stand still, I stood, petrified by shock and despair. My heart pounded in unison with every movement I saw before me. Anger and betrayal initially engulfed me like flames seizing dry grass. But the longer I watched, the more my feelings began to change. Lucy, my wife, was as passionate and lively as she was in the early days of our acquaintance. Her touches to another man were gentle and caring. Each of their movements was full of passion and desire, which I hadn't seen in her for many years. Her eyes sparkled, and her smile was so genuine and joyful. Their kisses were long and passionate, as if trying to capture this moment forever. Conflicting feelings battled in my mind. On one hand, I was shattered by the betrayal, but on the other, I was incredibly curious and even aroused to watch her. Seeing her in such an ecstatic and carefree state evoked in me a feeling I couldn't fully understand. Perhaps it was a sense of rekindled passion or a desire to be the one who brings her such pleasure, even if I wasn't the only one. Each of their touches, each look they shared, was filled with the tenderness and passion I thought we had lost forever, and at the same time, watching this, I began to understand that my feelings for Lucy hadn't died. They were forgotten and locked away deep inside, under the weight of everyday life and routine. Seeing her like this, in full passion and vivacity, reawakened in me a desire I hadn't felt for many years. The cool air outside the window contrasted with the warmth and passion I observed through the glass. I couldn't tear myself away from this scene. In every movement, every look, every touch between my wife and my friend. There was something mesmerizing, making my heart race. Seeing Lucy in such a liberated and passionate state suddenly ignited in me a desire, not just to watch, but to be part of it. I wanted to join them, to merge in a single burst of passion, forgetting everything in the world. It was so unexpected and strange for me to desire participating in what seemed like betrayal just a short while ago. I continued to watch until they reached their climax, united in one passion. In each of their touches, in each of their sighs, I felt my own desire growing, as if awakening from a long sleep. I imagined myself beside them, wrapped in the same sensations, immersed in the same whirlwind of emotions. When they finished, I slowly backed away from the window. I felt as if I was in a fog, where reality and fantasies intertwined. I knew I needed time to make sense of it all, to understand my feelings and desires. Deciding that Lucy shouldn't know I had seen everything, I silently moved away from the house and headed out to the street. Walking through the autumn city was odd. My thoughts wandered between images of what I had just witnessed and questions about the future, about our relationship, about my own desires. I knew I needed time to think it all over, to understand how exactly I should act. That evening, wandering through the autumn streets, my thoughts were full of contradictions. However, one thing was clear. I didn't want to destroy our relationship by exposing Lucy. The passion I had observed through the window had left an unexpected desire in my heart to witness their secret meetings. So I decided to install a hidden camera in the house. I wanted to see them together, to feel the same intensity of emotions I had experienced while standing at the window. Every whisper, every look, every passionate kiss stirred up a storm of conflicting feelings in me, ranging from outrage to a strange, burgeoning attraction. My desire to watch, secretly and unobserved, grew stronger with each passing day. Don't miss the next video, where I'll continue this gripping story. You'll find out how my secret observations evolved, what happened when I first opened up to my wife, and the unexpected turns our relationship took. Each new chapter of this story is filled with revelations and experiments. Subscribe to the channel and like the video to make sure you don't miss a single moment. Your support helps me to be more candid and share the most intriguing parts of my life. See you in the next video. Finally, I can sunbathe in the nude, Nina thought, untying the knot of her brother back and pulling down her panties. The women wear madly, disgusted, when the overall tan differed from that of the covered areas. At one point, the woman decided to turn over and expose her beautiful back and slender legs to the warm sun, putting aside her glass, her wine, and her book. The woman simply enjoyed the warmth. The man sandwalked the sleeping Mina. He promised to return nearly today, hinting at love. It had been 2 weeks since they had been intimate, and Nina had not seen her lover for 5 days. The instructor was sick and was at home treating a cold. Lena pretended to still be asleep and let her husband's hands caress her body. Her shoulders were lightly massaged, her back was stroked, and after a few seconds Nina felt the weight of her husband's body. There was a beautiful woman lying on a cushion, a gorgeous, huge balcony. A pretty hat and an elegant bathing suit, that was all the woman was wearing at the time. Mano had been very kin to her since she was a little girl. On holidays, the invited guests simply marveled at her girlish charm as she stood on a stool and recited poetry. Nina was not particularly clever in her understanding of science, but she always knew how to reach her goals. Even at school, this girl was enterprising, did not waste a time on useless communication, pursued her advantages, and was very beautiful in appearance. In her last year of school, the girl never carried her bag alone. There were always 2 or 3 boys competing to take the beautiful Nina home. Even in college, when her friends were partying at discos or sleeping in dorm rooms next to grieving students, Nina chronicled her innocence, hoping to sell for more. Vanilla's dream didn't last long. In her 5th year, at age 21, she had already met her prince. The man was 14 years older than her, but successful, rich, and owned his own business. How did he court her? At their wedding, he and Misha, Nina's spouse's name, vowed eternal love and fidelity. Nina did not fall in love. Yes, Misha was an interesting man. Yes, he idolized Nina. You will get used to it. So thought the girl when they were married. The only fly in this barrel of honey was the 11-year-old son of the chosen one. Nina had no intention of raising someone else's child, but the delicious cake named Misha was too tempting. Nina was now 28 years old. Her husband was a workaholic who had greatly increased his wealth and provided Nina with a poverty-free life. Women did not need to be educated, and being under the thumb of a strong man allowed Nina to just live, elif plaiserie, if 21 year. Old Nina looked like just another pretty girl. She was now transformed into a gorgeous woman. Beauty parlors, fitness, Botox, a little silicone, and now she is a goddess. Now this beautily sauna chaise along, exposing her luxuriant body to the warmth and rays of July. Her husband's urgent trip to the beach was cancelled, and Misha refused to let such a beauty go alone. Perhaps Nina would have sunbathed topless, but her son-in-law was hanging around the apartment. Their relationship, by the way, did not work out. Shortly after the wedding, the initially bouncy boy kept remembering the mother, who had abandoned them and eventually began to hate his stepmother. There was a beautiful woman lying on a cushion, a gorgeous huge balcony, wearing a pretty hat and an elegant bathing suit. That was all the woman was wearing at the time. Mano had been very kind to me since I was a little girl. On holidays, she would stand on a stool and recite the poetry, and all the guests would simply marvel at her girlish charm, the dimples on her cheeks, her gorgeous braids. Nina was not particularly clever in her understanding of science, but she always knew how to reach her goals. She was enterprising, did not waste time on unnecessary communication, pursued her own advantage, and was very good-looking. In her last year of school, the girl never carried her bag alone. There were always a group of 3 boys competing to take the beautiful Nina home. Even in college, when her friends were partying at the disco or sleeping in the next dorm room with the grieving students, Nina clung to her innocence and wanted to sell it for more. Vanilla's dream did not last long. In her 5th year, when the girl was 21, she had already met a prince. Thayman was 14 years older, successful, rich, and owned his own business. How did he court her? At their wedding, he and Misha, Nina's spouse's name, pledged their eternal love and fidelity. Nina did not fall in love. Yes, Misha was an interesting man, and he worshipped Nina. You'll get used to it, that washer thought when they married. The only fly in this barrel of honey was the chosen one's 11-year-old son. Nina had no intention of raising someone else's child, but the delicious cake named Misha was too tempting. Nina was now 28 years old, and her husband was a workaholic who had greatly increased his wealth and provided Nina with a life without poverty. Women did not need to be educated. Being under a strong man gave Nina the opportunity to simply live for pleasure and a fat 21. Nina looked like just another pretty girl. She was now transformed into a gorgeous woman. Aesthetics, fitness, Botox, a little silicone, and now she is a goddess. Now this beauty Lisana chaise along, exposing her luxuriant body to the warmth and rays of July. Her husband's urgent trip to the beach had to be cancelled, but Misha refused to let such a beauty go alone. Perhaps Nina would have sunbathed topless, but her son-in-law was hanging around the apartment and had no intention of appearing in a negligee. Their relationship, by the way, did not work out. After a bouncy start right after the wedding, the boy kept remembering his mother who had abandoned the man, then hated his stepmother. Estime wenten that were mained neutral and ignored each other. Nana developed a strange relationship with her husband. The first year of their marriage was passionate, but after that, her husband needed the woman only as a beautiful toy. Her husband took great pleasure in presenting his beautiful wife as a companion at social parties, and marital intimacy occurred only 2 or 3 times a month. Mikola was immersed in her work. For over a year, she had a fitness trainer as her mistress. The 30-year-old man was tall, pumped up, and very handsome. Periodically, Nana would balance her husband's bank card and give her lover expensive gifts. The trainer was a bit silly, but this buddy was divine. In fact, all Nana wanted from him was one thing. "Mom, I'm going for a walk, leave the stairs for him." Cordia did not report or obey her stepmother in particular, but she did comply with her father's request to be polite to Nina. Sometimes I'm gone. Finally, I can sunbathe in the nude, Nina thought, untying the knot of her brother back and pulling down her panties. The women were madly disgusted when the overall tan differed from that of the covered areas. At one point, the woman decided to turn over and expose her beautiful back and slender legs to the warm sun, putting aside her glass, her wine, and her book. The woman simply enjoyed the warmth. The man woke at the sleeping Mina. He promised to return nearly today, hinting at Lovey. It had been 2 weeks since they had been intimate, and Nina had not seen her lover for 5 days. The instructor was sick and was at home treating a cold. Lena pretended to still be asleep and with her husband's hands caressed her body. Her shoulders were lightly massaged, her back was stroked, and after a few seconds, Nina felt the weight of her husband's body. My Misha has lost some weight, were the last words the woman thought she braced herself against the weight of his body. The next moment, she was swept away by a storm of emotions. He opened my eyes and turned around sharply. Nina saw her son-in-law's face. The woman tried to pull away and throw herself off this 18-year-old boy, but the young man, perhaps anticipating this, held her tightly. Suddenly, I heard the door lock open. The lock had recently jammed. Misha didn't have time to replace the lock, and Collier and Nina couldn't be bothered to call a repairman. The boy quickly jumped off his stepmother and put on his pants on the way out, and Nina tried to find the bathing suit he had taken off by the time Misha got home. It was all decent. He had an antler on the top jam off the door, so it must have taken him that long to get in. It was a woman who had time to fix her outfit and wipe away the remnants of her sins when she emerged from the balcony saying, "Darling, you're home." Mina kissed her husband tenderly on the cheek, and Coria had long since taken care of herself in her room. The night was going to be festive. Misha had struck another successful deal and came in a good mood. Nina wore an expensive dress and under it was a beautiful lace undergarment. The head of the family sat in the center of the table with Nina and Coria on either side. Over a glass of wine, the stepmother and stepson looked at each other repeatedly. But like a true spy, Coria did not even show any sign of what had happened just before. She had no intention of telling her husband what had happened. She knew very well that such a thing would destroy the family. Yes, she could tell Misha that she had been with Hisson, but time twisted and distorted the facts, and Misha wouldn't necessarily take her side in the end. Not that Misha would take her side. By nightfall, Misha, encouraged by the success of his work and the wreath, hugged his wife. Nina responded with hugs and kisses, and they fell into their luxurious bed and hastily undressed. In the morning, Misha hurried to work. Before that, Nina prepared a delicious breakfast for her husband. Still, the women of the house had other work to do than rest. Kolya was still snoozing in her room. Nina took a shower and lightly applied makeup to her beautiful face. Even at home, this woman likes to be beautiful. An hour later, Kolya woke up and, half asleep, rushed into the bathroom. Nina hesitated to speak to her father-in-law for a long time, but after half an hour, he came into his room. "Kolya, what was that yesterday?" his stepmother asked him demandingly. Kolya was silent for a long time, very arrogant and spoiled by life. He had followed her in his own time. "I've liked you for a long time. You were so handsome, so charming. I thought about you all the time. I never paid attention to other girls," the boy said shyly. It was the first time he called Nina by her first name. Neither Nina nor the woman noticed her stepdaughter's shyness. The boy sat on the edge of the bed and lowered his eyes. He had indeed grown handsome and interesting. Yesterday had been too clever. Long ago, Nina had changed from a pretty girl into a selfish, calculating woman. In every action, in every word, Nina looked for a benefit. If a person was not profitable, and sometimes even unnecessary, she would easily step over him, trampling him with her sharp heels. Nina herself seemed to have a heart of stone, incapable of compassion or conscience. Now sitting in front of her was a young, sexy boy who was always at her beck and call. Technically, there was no kinship between them. Nina sat down next to him and pushed her already short silk robe to the limit. Coriel looked at her stepmother, who had pulled up her robe. Coriel looked at the woman with seductive eyes. Nina ran her hand over the boy's head. The lovers met every day. In the not-too-distant past, the fitness trainer sailed far, far away. Nina enjoyed the day with Corey, and in the evening, with Misha. Lately, Nina's cheeks had become quite pink. Her husband liked his new wife. Another evening, according to Misha, she and her business partner had dinner at a restaurant. Such meetings happened often and were reduced to small talk and the usual pranks. However, in this case, the partner was serious. For the last 6 months, Misha's business had been in decline. The instability of the dollar played its role, as did the default terms to creditors. No, the company still had significant assets, but its former greatness was gone. Therefore, a new partner was very important to Misha. In the morning, Nina began to pack. The woman visited a beauty salon, the stylist made her a chic manicure, bought a new fashionable dress. By evening, the women were glowing. The restaurant was decorated with expensive decor. Opposite them sat an elegant man in his 50s, Misha's partner, his attractive wife, and a small, beautiful, and very charming daughter. She was not even 18 years old, but she already looked like she was on the cover of a glossy magazine. The final touch of glamour was a necklace of diamonds around her neck. But these preparations didn't matter when I noticed that Collier, who was sitting next to her, wasn't even looking at her and was very friendly with the girl. She answered him in kind, and after the toasts, the fathers of both families announced that the young people would soon be married. They love each other. Besides, getting married will strengthen the family bond and do everything possible to make the transaction go smoothly. Nina almost opened her mouth in surprise. Her life was used to self-interest, but now she didn't want to lose Corey. She was so deeply attached to Corey that she couldn't think of a day without him. In the evenings, she was already haranguing her husband. "Darling, don't be ashamed that you only married Meissen because of our business relationship, Nina. You don't understand. So much has happened at my company in the last 6 months that we're on the verge of bankruptcy. My partner is a breath of fresh air for us. He's someone who can make things happen. Also, you have seen the way our children look at each other and love each other. That will be the perfect foundation for our relationship in bed." Nan mentioned her headache, and after a few minutes, she heard her husband's quiet wailing. She ran to Coria's room. The bewildered stepmother knew full well that the children would marry someday, but she didn't expect it to happen so soon. "Coria, dear, have you really decided to get married?" Coria said with tears in her eyes. Coria hugged Nina tightly. "But I only love you. Do you hear me? I love only you." Coria hugged her mom gently and then kissed her, whereas before she had always taken advantage of the fact that Misha wasn't home during their affair. Now there was passion. Despite the preparations for the wedding, Nina and Kolya's relationship did not stop. They took every opportunity for intimacy and enjoyed each other as if it was their last day. The wedding was amazing, a gorgeous restaurant, tons of guests, an amazing hostess and guest entertainers. The bride resembled a Disney princess. Collier was also dressed in an inexpensive suit. Guests praised the bride and groom as the most beautiful couple. Everyone seemed to be having fun, making loud toasts and wishing them happiness. Only Nina looked increasingly gloomy. For the last 6 months she had been overwhelmed by her young lover. It had been a long time since she had looked for connections on the side. She didn't want to be malleable, she had simply fallen in love with Coria. It was like falling in love for the first time in her life, but now it was given to someone else. Nina, who had recently gotten used to heavy drinking, now drank vodka with a foolish frankness, and she was repeatedly pointed out to her husband the boundaries of propriety. Now she was not interested in boundaries. The woman looked at Correa. Correa kissed his bride, and the bride shrieked at the general's thrust. Few paid attention to the teenager in an overcoat who approached Misha's partner. Taking a breath, he held out an envelope to his partner. When he saw what was inside, his partner's eyes rolled back. "The wedding is over," the man said loudly, quickly headed for the exit and handed the envelope to Misha, who was sitting to his right. Misha took a photograph from the envelope. It was unclear who had taken it and under what circumstances, but it clearly showed an unequal scene between Nina and Cora. The wife sitting next to him looked at the photograph and experienced indescribable fear. Who? When? Who? Nina thought. "Get out of here," said Misha, pointing his finger at his son, quietly but blatantly threatening. "Tomorrow is the enlistment office and the army, and yes, get out of my house too." After uttering a few hurtful words, Misha left the restaurant as well. Nana was much smarter and more calculating. For the first time in her life, she fell in love and relaxed. She realized how good she felt.
If you found out about the affair, could you stop? Or would the desire to know more take over, as it did with me? The screen flickered in front of Michael, casting a soft blue light across the darkened room. His heart beat steadily, but his mind was a whirlwind of emotions he could hardly contain. On the screen, Sarah and Jack were together in the dimly lit hotel room, their movements slow, deliberate, as if time itself had slowed down for them. Jack reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair away from Sarah's face. The touch was tender, intimate in a way that Michael hadn't seen between them in years. His fingers trailed down her neck, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder, and Sarah, as if responding to some unseen force, leaned into him. Her eyes fluttered shut, and Michael could see the subtle shift in her body there, not from cold, but from anticipation and pleasure. Jack slowly leaned in toward her lips, their breaths mingling, and at that moment, there wasn't a shred of doubt between them. Sarah responded to his kiss with a passion that Michael hadn't felt from her in years. She pressed herself closer to Jack, her hands gently sliding across his shoulders, and every gesture, every breath seemed so natural, so genuine. She trembled under his touch, as if this was her only moment of true freedom and joy. Michael sat motionless, unable to tear his eyes away from the screen. He saw how Sarah savored every moment, how her face glowed with emotion. She looked different there, more alive, more open. In those moments when she touched Jack, it seemed as if the world around her disappeared. Michael knew he should feel pain, jealousy, but something darker pierced through him there. A strange satisfaction from witnessing this, from being a spectator of her happiness that he could no longer give her. He saw how Jack's hands gently caressed her body, how Sarah responded to his every touch, how her body arched in response to his movements. Her smile, the soft laughter, the whispers there, all of it seemed so real, so far from the Sarah he knew at home. It hurt, but at the same time it was mesmerizing. Michael was like a prisoner of his own emotions, frozen before the screen, unable to stop the flood of feelings that washed over him. Michael sat as if chained to the screen, unable to look away. Everything inside him screamed that this was wrong, that he should get up right now, clench his fists and rush over there, confront them, expose Sarah, demand a divorce, accuse her of betrayal. Logic dictated that this was the natural course of action. Any husband in his place would have done exactly that. But Michael couldn't move. His body, mind, emotions all seemed paralyzed before the screen. He couldn't tear himself away, and there was something painfully beautiful in it. He watched as Jack gently touched Sarah, how his hands glided over her body, how Sarah gave herself to those touches, how her face filled with an expression of pleasure that Michael hadn't seen in years. Every movement Jack made, every response from Sarah seemed to captivate him. They looked beautiful, almost perfect. Sarah, whom he knew as his wife, appeared before him in a completely new light there, as a woman capable of emotions and passion he hadn't felt in a long time. Her face, her body, her movements there, they all seemed so alive, so real. His mind contradicted itself. This was pain, sharp and cutting, from the realization that this was happening to his wife, to the woman he had once loved. But at the same time deep down, on some strange, unfamiliar level he liked it. This feeling was so foreign, so new, that he couldn't understand what was happening to him. It was as if he had become a witness to a secret, forbidden moment, and the thrill of it was something he couldn't control. He should have stopped. Logic demanded that he close the laptop, break all connections, and destroy this evidence of betrayal. But his emotions wouldn't let him. There was a strange magnetism in this, something more than just the shock of betrayal. It was almost like aesthetic pleasure there. He was watching this as something beautiful, sensual, almost like art. How she moved in Jacques' hands, how her body arched, how her lips touched his skin, how her breath quickened with each kiss. This was just the prologue, a glimpse into the moments that would forever change the course of my life, leaving me entangled in a web of emotions I couldn't untangle. But this is only the beginning. What happened? How I found myself standing on the edge of the unknown, watching what no husband should ever witness there. I'll tell you everything from the start. Every small sign, every doubt that turned into a revelation, and every moment that led me to this point there. This is the story of how it all began. And as you follow along, you'll see, just as I did, how the lines between love, obsession, and something darker began to blur. Michael sat at the kitchen table, his face illuminated by the glow of his laptop. Outside, the bright California sun was just beginning to break through the sheer curtains. The house was quiet there. His wife, Sarah, had left for work an hour ago, and the kids were at school. It was a typical morning for their all-American family. A spacious suburban home, a perfectly manicured lawn, and 2 SUVs parked in the driveway. Michael had always been proud of how far they had come. Just ordinary kids from middle-class backgrounds, they had achieved the American dream. Their own property, successful careers. Sarah was a sales manager at a large company, and he worked in cybersecurity. But behind this image of suburban bliss lay a growing sense of routine fatigue, something they rarely spoke about. He thought again about how their life had become predictable. Work from morning till night, weekends spent with neighbors at barbecues or attending the kids' soccer games. Everything ran like clockwork, and he could feel their relationship slowly withering away. The spark that once connected them was no longer there. Michael placed his coffee cup on the table and ran a hand over his short-cropped hair. It used to be thicker, like Jacques, their neighbor from across the street. But that was a long time ago. Now he didn't look as young and fresh as he had 10 years ago. His thoughts often drifted to Sarah and how she had changed too. She spent more and more time at work, came home later than usual, and often turned down their plans with the excuse of being too tired. His cybersecurity instincts told him something was wrong. But on the other hand, it could just be his imagination, paranoia that he often noticed in his line of work. Michael glanced at the laptop screen, where notifications from a client via security system were popping up. This was his world via controlled, structured, full of order. Unlike what was starting to happen in his personal life. The day passed in its usual routine. Michael answered work emails, attended video calls with clients, and monitored security systems. But even during work tasks, his thoughts constantly returned to Sarah. Why had she left for work again without really saying goodbye? Why was she avoiding eye contact with him more and more? These small details held a much bigger problem, one he couldn't fully grasp yet. Late in the evening, when Sarah finally came home, Michael barely heard the sound of the door. He was sitting in the living room, pretending to watch TV. Sarah entered the room, bringing with her the chill of the autumn air. She looked tired, but there was something else in her eyes, something Michael couldn't recognize. Maybe it was just work fatigue, but at that moment Michael felt, for the first time, that he no longer knew her the way he once had. Michael felt something rising inside him, whether it was anger or fear, he couldn't tell. But once again, he didn't ask the question that had been bothering him. Why should he? He already knew the answer, he just feared saying it out loud. The evening passed as usual. Sarah went to bed earlier than Michael, citing exhaustion from the long day. She didn't want to talk, giving him only a brief kiss on the cheek before heading to the bedroom. Left alone in the kitchen, Michael stared at his half-empty coffee cup, trying to calm the growing tension. His thoughts about something being wrong were no longer just suspicions there. They had become an obsession. He walked into his office, turned on the soft light of the desk lamp, and sat down at his computer. Everything was ready there, just a few hours ago. He had purchased and installed hidden cameras throughout their home, strategically placing them where Sarah might have her private conversations or meet someone. One camera overlooked the kitchen, another the bedroom. Michael knew this was crossing a line, but he couldn't stop himself. He opened the live feed from one of the cameras, freezing for a moment. Everything looked as expected where Sarah was asleep. Nothing unusual. But inside, his emotions were spiraling. For the first time in his life, he felt like he was truly in control. He wasn't just suspecting or guessing there. Now he had facts. But were they the facts he really wanted? Every sound, every step Sarah took in the house could now be heard or recorded. This new reality gave him a strange sense of power. It was more than just the need to know the truth. In his mind, a realization began to dawn. He wasn't just uncovering secrets. He was controlling them. He could monitor what she did, what she said, while staying invisible in the shadows. He switched to another camera, the one he had placed in Sarah's car. Over the past few weeks, she had been going out more often, claiming she had to work late. Michael couldn't help but wonder, what if these trips had nothing to do with work? It took him a few minutes to access the recorded footage. His heart pounded harder as he watched Sarah get into the car and drive off in the evening, right after she said she was going to visit a friend. His fear and doubt slowly gave way to another feeling. Pleasure? Pleasure from the fact that he was in control of the situation, though he didn't fully realize it yet. He was watching his wife as if she were an object, and with every passing minute, he was drawn deeper into this. Though what if I find out the truth? What then? Michael asked himself, but the answer didn't come. He only knew that he couldn't stop. The cameras had become his eyes and ears, helping him reclaim the control he thought he had lost. Days turned into weeks, and what had started as a simple act of curiosity became an obsession for Michael. Every day after Sarah left for work, he would sit in his office, watching the live feeds from the cameras, checking her movements, her phone calls, her emails. It was all too easy for someone like him there. His career in cybersecurity had taught him how to gather information without being noticed. But the more he watched, the more he realized something was changing inside him. At first, he thought it was just the need for control, the desire to reclaim what he thought was slipping away. But now, as he sat in front of the screen, watching Sarah laugh on the phone with someone there, a man whose voice he couldn't quite make out there, he felt something different. The pain of betrayal that had once consumed him was now mixed with something else, something he couldn't yet name. He didn't confront her. He could have. The evidence was there, recorded in the files on his computer, waiting for him to use. But each time he thought about exposing her, about confronting Sarah and her lover, he stopped himself. Instead, he felt a strange thrill as he watched her. As if by observing her secret life, he had found a new way to be part of it. Michael had never considered himself a voyeur. The idea of watching people without their knowledge had always seemed perverse to him. But now, sitting in his dimly lit office, with only the glow of the monitor illuminating his face, he couldn't deny the rush that came over him each time he hit play on one of the recordings. It was no longer just about the betrayal. It was about understanding, about witnessing something raw and private. He had never seen this side of Sarah before there. The way she moved when she thought no one was watching, the way she smiled at her phone, the way her voice softened when she spoke to this other man. It was as if he was seeing her for the first time, and that realization both terrified and excited him. One evening, as he watched Sarah leave the house, saying she was going to meet her friend, Michael knew where she was really going. He had seen the messages, heard the phone calls. She wasn't going to meet a friend. She was meeting him, the man, her lover. Michael had every chance to follow her, to catch her in the act. But instead, he did something he hadn't expected. He sat back in his chair and let her go. He didn't need to follow her there. He already knew what was happening. And strangely, he didn't feel the anger he thought he would. Instead, there was a quiet, unsettling calm that settled over him. As the door closed behind her, Michael stared at the screen, the live feed from the camera in the kitchen showing an empty room. He could hear his own breathing, slow and steady, as the minutes ticked by. He was in control. He could see everything, know everything, without ever having to confront it. And for the first time, he wondered if maybe that was enough. Michael no longer felt like a passive observer in his own life. The cameras he had installed were more than just tools for surveillance. They had become extensions of his own eyes, a way for him to live through Saravere's secret world without being physically present. He wasn't just watching, he was participating. And the more he watched, the more he realized that his emotions were far from what he had initially expected. Sitting in his office late at night, Michael replayed the footage from earlier in the day. Sarah had met her lover at a quiet CFG copyright on the outskirts of town. It wasn't the first time he had watched them together, but today was different. Today, instead of the usual wave of jealousy or anger, he felt something darker, something that unnerved him but also excited him in ways he hadn't anticipated. As he watched them talk, their bodies leaning closer together, sharing whispers and soft touches, Michael's heart raced. But it wasn't just the pain of betrayal that made his pulse quicken. It was the strange sense of satisfaction that came with knowing that he was the unseen witness to their affair, that he had the power to observe them without being observed. It was intoxicating in a way he couldn't fully explain. He had never felt this before. The thrill of control, the power of voyeurism. It was new, unsettling, but undeniably addictive. And the more he watched, the more he craved it. The idea of confronting Sarah, of ending the charade, felt distant now, almost irrelevant. Why confront her when he could continue to watch, to know every detail of her secret life? It was as if by not acting, by not intervening, he had found a new way to control her. He closed the laptop and leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. The room was dark, the only light coming from the small lamp on his desk. His breathing was shallow, his thoughts swirling in an endless loop of questions he didn't want to answer. What was happening to him? When had his pain turned into this strange pleasure? He thought back to when he first discovered the affair. The rage, the shock, the humiliation. It had all been so overwhelming. But now, that anger had faded into something more insidious. He no longer felt the need to expose Sarah or her lover. Instead, he found comfort in the routine of watching, in the quiet power that came with his secret knowledge. Michael stood up, walking over to the window that overlooked their backyard. The suburban streets were quiet, the neighbors' houses dark. It was late and everyone was asleep. Everyone but him. He could feel the weight of his actions pressing down on him. But at the same time, there was a lightness, a freedom in the way he had embraced his new role. The man he had been, a husband, a father, a provider, felt distant now, like a character in a story he no longer wanted to play. The cameras, the surveillance, the watching, it gave him something he hadn't felt in a long time. Control. But was it really control or just the illusion of it? He wasn't sure anymore. Sarah would never know the truth about what he had seen, what he knew. And that was perhaps the most powerful part of it all. The knowledge that he could watch, listen, and remain hidden. That he could be present in their lives without ever having to confront them. And as he stood there, staring out into the dark night, Michael couldn't help but wonder if this was who he had always been. Maybe, deep down, he had always craved this the quiet, invisible power of being the unseen observer. Michael's days had begun to blur together. Each morning, he woke up before Sarah, went through the motions of making coffee, checking emails, and pretending to live the life of a normal husband. But underneath the surface, everything had changed. His real life now existed in the hours spent alone in his office, in front of the glowing screens, watching his wife's every move. It was no longer just about knowing where she went or who she was with. It was about feeling something, anything, in the midst of the numbness that had overtaken him. The rush of watching her, the pulse of anticipation as she met her lover again and again, became the only thing that truly made him feel alive. One evening, As Michael sat in his office, he found himself clicking through old footage. He wasn't looking for anything specific there, just reliving moments, as if they were scenes from a movie. There was Sarah, walking through the house, talking on the phone. There she was, laughing with their kids at the dinner table. And then, there she was again with him her lover at that same CFGO copyright where they met so often. The longer he watched, the more disconnected he felt from the life he used to live. It was as if he were no longer part of it. He was an outsider, a spectator. And yet, the strange satisfaction of being the one who knew everything, the one who held all the secrets, kept him coming back for more. That night, something shifted. As he watched Sarah and her lover in a dimly lit hotel room, Michael realized he no longer felt the urge to confront them. The anger, the betrayal, the desire to expose the affair, it was all gone. In its place was something darker, something more primal. He was no longer just watching them because he had to know. He was watching them because he wanted to. His hand hovered over the keyboard, the temptation to rewind, to rewatch certain moments pulling at him. The way Sarah looked at her lover, the way she touched him these were things he had never seen her do with him, not in years. And yet, instead of feeling hurt, Michael felt something else stir within him, something that both terrified and thrilled him. He could end it. He could march into the bedroom right now, wake Sarah up, and confront her with the truth. He could shatter their marriage in an instant, and everything would be over. But as he sat there, staring at the screen, he knew that he wouldn't veti. He couldn't veti, because deep down, a part of him didn't want it to end. The power he held over them over her was intoxicating. By not acting, by letting the affair continue, he was in control. And that control, however twisted, gave him a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He didn't need to be the loving husband, the doting father. He didn't need to be anything but this an observer, an invisible force in their lives, knowing everything while revealing nothing. The realization hit him like a wave, both liberating and suffocating at the same time. He had become something else, someone else. And maybe, just maybe, this new version of himself was more honest than the man he had pretended to be for so long. As the night dragged on, Michael continued to watch, his mind racing. This was his life now, silent, hidden, but in control. He no longer needed the confrontation, the answers, or the truth. He had all the power he needed, sitting alone in the dark, watching the lives of others unfold before him. The moment Michael had dreaded and secretly longed for finally arrived one evening when he least expected it. Sarah had left the house earlier than usual, claiming she was meeting an old friend for drinks. But Michael knew better. He knew exactly where she was going, who she was meeting, and what they would be doing. He could picture it all in vivid detail, the way he had seen it unfold countless times before on the hidden cameras. But tonight was different. Tonight, he wasn't just a passive observer. He felt something growing inside him, a need to be closer to the truth, even if only from a distance. Without a second thought, Michael grabbed his jacket, left the house, and got into his car. He knew the hotel, the one they frequented. He had seen it on the footage. Now, for the first time, he would see it in person. As he drove through the quiet streets of their suburban neighborhood, the world outside seemed so ordinary, so calm. The same streets they had walked as a family, the same houses they had driven by on the way to the kids' soccer games. But inside Michael, there was nothing ordinary left. He had changed, evolved into something he barely recognized. When he arrived at the hotel, he parked a few blocks away, out of sight. His heart was pounding, but not from fear. It was excitement, anticipation. He knew exactly what was happening inside those walls. Sarah was with him, her lover. And for the first time, Michael was no longer content to watch from afar. He needed to be closer, to feel the rush of their proximity, even if they never saw him. He walked slowly toward the hotel, his mind racing. There was no plan, no confrontation in his mind. He wasn't here to stop anything. He wasn't here to break it all apart. He was here for one reason only, to observe, to experience the power of being so close to the truth without being a part of it. The hotel lobby was quiet, almost eerily so. Michael walked through the entrance, his head down, moving quickly to avoid drawing attention. He knew the room number. He had seen it on the camera footage, heard Sarah mention it in one of her phone calls. He didn't need to ask. He knew everything. When he reached the hallway outside their room, Michael stopped, his breath catching in his throat. He could hear the muffled sound of voices. Laughter. Her laughter. The same laughter he hadn't heard in years. The sound pierced him, but not in the way he had expected. It didn't bring pain or anger. It brought a strange sense of release. Standing there, just inches from the door, he realized something he had never fully accepted before. He didn't want to confront Sarah. He didn't want to tear apart their lives, expose the lies, or demand answers. No, what he wanted what he needed was exactly this. To be here, to witness, but never to be seen. To hold the ultimate power of knowledge without the burden of action. For the first time, Michael felt free. Free from the constraints of being a husband. Free from the expectations of confronting the truth. He had chosen his role, and it was one that gave him more control than he had ever imagined. He didn't need to stop them. He didn't need to interfere. He was in control by simply knowing, by watching. As the minutes ticked by, Michael stood there, unmoving, listening to the sounds of Sarah and her lover from the other side of the door. He could picture everything in his mind, every touch, every whisper. And in that moment, he realized that this was enough. The power of being invisible, of knowing but not acting it was intoxicating. It was everything he had come to crave. When he finally turned to leave, there was no sadness, no anger. Just a quiet satisfaction that settled over him like a blanket. He had become something new, something different, and he had accepted it. As Michael walked out of the hotel and into the cool night air, he felt lighter than he had in years. He no longer needed to be part of their lives in the way he once thought. He was content to watch, to know, to hold the secrets in his hands. And for the first time, he felt in control. Michael sat in his office the next morning, the sunlight filtering through the blinds, casting thin lines of light across his desk. The house was quiet, as it always was this time of day. Sarah had already left, heading off to work, and the kids were at school. It was the perfect moment for reflection, and Michael found himself staring at the black screen of his computer, not quite ready to dive into the surveillance footage just yet. He didn't need to watch anymore. Not like before. The cameras were still there, recording everything in their usual silent manner, but Michael had reached a new level of understanding. He had crossed the threshold between passive observer and something else entirely someone who had accepted the role of the unseen. He no longer felt the gnawing curiosity that had driven him to install the cameras in the first place. He didn't need answers because he already had them. The house felt different now, too. What once seemed like a sanctuary, a place where he could relax and be himself, was now more like a stage. And he was the director, controlling the narrative from behind the scenes. He knew when Sarah was lying. He knew when she was planning to meet her lover. He knew everything. But none of that mattered anymore. It wasn't about the affair anymore. It wasn't about the lies, the betrayal, or the secrets. Those things had lost their sting long ago. What mattered was the control he now felt, control over his own emotions, over the situation, over his life. Watching had become less about Sarah and her actions, and more about the strange sense of power he got from simply knowing. That night at the hotel had been a turning point. He had stood there, just feet away from his wife and her lover, and felt nothing but calm. He had walked away not because he was afraid of what he might do, but because he didn't need to do anything. By choosing not to act, he had taken control in a way that neither of them could understand. Michael leaned back in his chair, his eyes drifting to the screen. With a single click, he could bring up the live feed, watch Sarah at work, or even check on her car to see where she was headed after. But the urge wasn't there anymore. He had moved past that. For the first time in what felt like years, he felt a strange sense of peace wash over him. The man he had been the husband who needed answers, who craved confrontation was gone. In his place was someone new, someone who had found a quiet kind of satisfaction in simply being the one who knew everything, without the need to reveal it. Sarah would never know. She would never suspect that every move she made was being watched, analyzed, understood. And that was perhaps the greatest satisfaction of all. Michael held all the power and he didn't need to use it. As the day passed, Michael went through the motions of work, answering emails, attending virtual meetings, but his mind was elsewhere. He knew Sarah would be home later, tired from another long day at work, or so she would say. She would kiss him on the cheek, perhaps offer a half-hearted apology for coming home late, and they would go through the familiar dance of pretending everything was normal. But now Michael didn't mind. He had accepted the reality of his life, the role he had chosen to play. The cameras would continue to record, the secrets would continue to unfold, and he would remain in the shadows, watching, knowing, and ultimately, controlling. When Sarah finally came home that evening, Michael was sitting at the kitchen table, a glass of whiskey in his hand. She smiled at him, a tired, forced smile, and he returned it, knowing that behind that smile was a world of lies and half-truths. But it didn't bother him. Not anymore. The long day? He asked, his voice calm, almost indifferent. Yeah, she replied, setting her purse down on the counter. Just exhausted. Michael nodded, taking a slow sip from his glass. He didn't need to ask where she had been, or who she had been with. He already knew, and that was enough. As Sarah turned to walk upstairs, Michael watched her go, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. He had won not by confronting her, not by exposing the affair, but by accepting his new role in their story. He was the observer, the one who knew everything but chose to remain silent. And in that silence, Michael had found peace. Weeks turned into months, and life for Michael settled into a strange kind of routine. The surveillance cameras still ran silently in the background, capturing every moment of Sarah's life when she thought she was alone. But Michael no longer needed to watch them with the same intensity as before. He had reached a point of understanding that transcended the need for constant observation. The winter months crept in and the days grew shorter. Michael found himself spending more time at home, working remotely while Sarah continued her usual routine, leaving early, coming home late, with brief, tired conversations between them. Their marriage had become a comfortable silence, a mutual understanding that neither would speak the truth out loud. One evening, Michael sat by the fireplace, the warmth of the flames flickering across his face as he stared into the distance. The kids were upstairs, playing in their rooms, and Sarah was once again out, working late, but the absence no longer weighed on him as it once had. He had come to terms with the fact that their lives had taken different paths, even if they remained under the same roof. As the fire crackled softly, Michael's phone buzzed with a notification. It was the security system, alerting him that Sarah's car had left a familiar location. He knew exactly where she had been and where she was headed. He could have opened the app, checked the live feed, but instead he set the phone down without a second thought. It no longer mattered. Michael had come to understand something important in these quiet months of observation. Life wasn't about chasing the truth or confronting lies. It was about control, about finding peace in the choices you made for yourself. He had chosen his path. He had chosen to watch, to know, and to let go. Sarah would return home later that night, as she always did. She would smile, kiss him on the cheek, and they would sit together in the living room, perhaps watch a movie, or talk briefly about the kids. The surface of their life remained the same, but underneath, Michael knew the truth of it all. And that truth, once painful, had become his quiet source of power. The cameras would keep running. The recordings would continue. But Michael no longer needed them the way he once had. They were there, like silent witnesses to a life he had chosen to watch from a distance. But he no longer needed to check them obsessively. He had moved beyond that. As the night deepened, and the house fell into silence, Michael finished his drink and stood up, glancing out the window at the dark street outside. He felt no anger, no bitterness, just the calm acceptance of a man who had found peace in his own way. Sarah would never know the extent of what he had done, what he had seen. She would never know how much control he held over their lives. and Michael had no intention of revealing it. He had no need to. The power he felt came not from exposing the truth, but from quietly holding it close, unseen, untouched. As he turned away from the window and headed upstairs to bed, Michael felt lighter than he had in years. He was no longer the man he once was, no longer the husband who needed answers or confrontation. He had become something else, something freer, more detached, but in control. And in that control, Michael had found his peace. Secret Life of 3, When Desire is Stronger Than Pain. John stood in the shadows, trying not to breathe too loudly so as not to give himself away. He watched as Matt's hands slowly slid across his wife's body, as he touched her with a tenderness that John hadn't shown Emily in years. Matt leaned in closer, whispering something in her ear, and she smiled, as if this was the most natural moment in the world. His lips brushed against her neck, and Emily closed her eyes, pressing herself against him, forgetting everything else. In that moment, John felt everything inside him begin to boil. A wave of anger surged through him. This was his friend, his wife, and they had betrayed him. He wanted to burst into the room, stop everything, scream, tear off their masks, and shatter their illusion. His heart pounded so loudly, he was sure they would hear him any second. But he stood still, as if rooted to the spot. And suddenly, the anger began to shift into something else. The longer he watched, the more he saw these caresses, these touches, how her body responded to Matt's every move, the stronger a strange, indescribable pleasure rose within him. He couldn't understand where it came from, why he couldn't look away. He should have felt pain, should have been suffering from what he saw, but instead, something inside him was enjoying this moment. It seemed that what was happening didn't hurt him anymore, but rather, captivated him. He watched as Emily gave herself to this moment, and with each passing minute, his anger slowly dissolved, giving way to something deeper, something he had never felt before. Inside him, a conflict raged, between what he believed was right, and what his body and mind craved to continue seeing. Now I will tell you how it all began and how it ended. You will hear a story where the lines between love, betrayal, and unimaginable desire blurred. A story where anger did not lead to destruction but evolved into something darker, something deeper. Our hero found himself in a situation where the world he knew crumbled before his eyes, and instead of running away, he did something that can't be explained in simple words. He stayed. He watched. John sat on the back porch of their suburban home, nursing a beer as the sun dipped behind the hills in the distance. The kids were playing on the lawn, their laughter filling the warm evening air. It was the kind of evening that should have felt perfect. The soft breeze, the smell of barbecues wafting from nearby houses, the hum of sprinklers in the distance, this was the life he had always dreamed of. A family, a home, security. On the surface, it was everything anyone could want. But lately, John couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't anything obvious at first, no big fights or screaming matches. Just distance. A subtle shift in Emily's behavior. She seemed distracted more often, her phone always within arm's reach, notifications lighting up the screen when she thought he wasn't looking. There was a time when they'd sit together after putting the kids to bed, sharing stories about their day or just enjoying the quiet. But those moments had become rare, almost non-existent. Now, Emily often excused herself early, claiming she was exhausted, retreating to the bedroom with her phone in hand. He told himself not to worry. People change, don't they? They get comfortable, take each other for granted after years of marriage. That's what he'd heard from friends, from family. It's normal. Still, something gnawed at him, a quiet voice in the back of his mind that refused to be silenced. Every time Emily's laughter sounded too forced or her smile too practiced, the voice grew louder. It wasn't just Emily, either. Matt, John's best friend, had been around a lot more lately. Matt had always been part of their lives, a fixture at every family gathering, every barbecue, and every late-night hangout after the kids went to sleep. He was practically family. They had been friends since college, inseparable through thick and thin. But now, whenever Matt was around, John couldn't help but notice the small, subtle glances between him and Emily. The way they seemed to share unspoken words across the room, their smiles too frequent, too comfortable. It was nothing. John told himself that over and over. They were just close. It was normal for friends to be like that, wasn't it? But the doubt had already started to creep in, and once it did, it was impossible to ignore. One night, after Emily had gone to bed, John sat in the living room alone, staring at the flickering glow of the TV, not really watching. His phone buzzed, and out of habit, he reached for it. A message notification from Emily's phone flashed on the screen across the room where she had left it charging. He wasn't the type to snoop, never had been. But something about the way the phone buzzed, the way it felt so out of place in the quiet of the house, made his stomach drop. John hesitated, staring at the phone. His heart pounded in his chest, an inexplicable feeling of dread washing over him. He told himself to leave it alone. But his hands moved on their own, reaching for Emily's phone, unlocking it with a passcode he had known for years but never felt the need to use until now. The screen lit up with a message from Matt. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow." A knot formed in John's throat, his mind racing. His eyes stayed glued to the message, as if reading it over and over again might somehow change the meaning. But it didn't. There it was, plain as day. At that moment, 1,000 thoughts collided in his mind. He should be furious, right? He should storm into the bedroom, confront Emily, demand answers. His muscles tensed, ready to explode into action. But something stopped him. The fury, the hurt, it was there, boiling just beneath the surface, but alongside it was something else. Curiosity. What had really been going on between them? How long had this been happening? The questions buzzed in his mind like a swarm of angry bees, but instead of charging upstairs, John found himself frozen in place, staring at the phone. The anger he expected didn't rise. Instead, a different feeling, a sickening intrigue, began to take root. He didn't go to Emily that night. Instead, he waited. John spent the next few days in a haze. The message from Matt replayed in his mind over and over, but he couldn't bring himself to confront Emily. Something inside him held him back, like an invisible weight pressing on his chest. Instead, he began to observe. Quietly, without saying a word, he watched Emily more closely, her behavior, her expressions, the way she moved around the house. He noticed every little thing now. How she checked her phone more often, smiling faintly at messages she quickly hid. How she would mention plans with her friends or work commitments but seemed evasive when he asked for details. It was as if a veil had been lifted, and John saw the world through a different lens. Every shared glance between Emily and Matt at their usual gatherings now took on a different meaning. Every time they laughed at something private, every casual touch of the hand, every exchange of smiles, it all seemed like part of some secret language they shared. And the worst part? John didn't feel the anger he thought he would. Instead, he felt a sick, twisted fascination growing inside him. It was wrong, he knew it. He should be furious. He should be planning his next move, hiring a lawyer, confronting them both, ending it all. But instead, he found himself pulled deeper into the web, wanting to know more. One evening, as Emily was in the shower, John couldn't help himself. He unlocked her phone again. It was easier this time, like it had become a reflex. Scrolling through her messages, his breath quickened. There they were, conversations between her and Matt, filled with playful banter and hidden meanings. Some messages were innocent enough, but others hinted at something more. There were inside jokes, flirtatious emojis, and then, there it was, confirmation. A message from Matt sent earlier that week. "I had a great time the other night, we should do it again soon." John's stomach churned, but still, the fury didn't come. Instead, he felt a strange sense of clarity, as if a part of him had always known this was happening, but he hadn't been willing to see it. Now, there was no denying it. The truth was laid bare in front of him. And yet, as he stared at the screen, his mind raced with conflicting thoughts. Why wasn't he more angry? Why wasn't he reacting like any other husband would? The more he thought about it, the more he realized the truth. He didn't want to confront Emily. He didn't want the explosive argument, the accusations, the tears. What he wanted was to see more. To know more. There was a part of him that craved understanding, that wanted to witness it with his own eyes, no matter how painful it might be. And the thought of it, watching from the shadows, knowing everything they thought they were hiding, gave him an unexpected thrill that he couldn't explain it, even to himself. But as he put Emily's phone back in its place and heard the water turn off in the bathroom, John made a decision. He wasn't going to confront them. Not yet. He wanted to see how far it would go. The next week passed in a blur of tension and anticipation. John began to pay even closer attention to Emily's routines. He pretended not to notice when she made excuses to leave the house, always giving vague reasons about errands or meeting a friend. He played along, smiling and nodding, as if nothing was wrong. But deep down, the sick curiosity was growing. He wanted to know what she was doing when she wasn't with him. He needed to know that it didn't take long for him to figure out where Emily and Matt were meeting. They weren't careful enough, and John, with his sharp instincts, pieced it together quickly. One Saturday afternoon, when Emily told him she was going to run some errands, John waited until she left, then quietly followed her. His heart pounded as he drove a few cars behind her, his mind racing with a mix of dread and excitement. He knew where she was going before she even pulled into the parking lot of a small, secluded hotel on the outskirts of town. There was no mistaking it now. This was where it was happening. He parked a safe distance away, his hands gripping the steering wheel, watching as Emily got out of the car, looked around nervously, and walked inside. A few minutes later, Matt's car pulled up, and John watched as his best friend casually strolled into the same hotel. John's breath hitched in his throat, and for a brief moment, he thought about storming in, confronting them both, making a scene. But then, just as quickly, the thought passed. Instead, he stayed in the car, his pulse racing, his mind spinning that he couldn't look away. John left the hotel that night feeling like he had crossed a line he could never come back from. But the weight of guilt that he had expected never came. Instead, there was only a strange sense of liberation, as if by watching them, he had found something new inside himself. He drove home in silence, the events of the evening replaying in his mind. Emily and Matt had no idea he had been there, just a few feet away, witnessing their secret. And that gave John a kind of power he had never known before. The days that followed were almost surreal. On the outside, everything was the same. Emily would smile at him across the dinner table, talk to the kids about their day, kiss him on the cheek before bed. But now, every word, every glance, was laced with hidden meaning. John didn't see her the same way anymore. She wasn't just his wife, she was the woman he was watching, the woman he knew so much about without her ever realizing it. And it thrilled him. He continued to set up more cameras, hiding them in places where he could observe without being seen. It wasn't just about catching them anymore, it was about feeding the strange, twisted need that had taken root inside him. The more he watched, the more he realized that this new dynamic, this secret, voyeuristic control, wasn't something he wanted to end. It was something he craved. He became obsessed with their meetings, waiting for the next time Emily would make an excuse to leave the house, the next time she'd text Matt with plans to meet. And every time, John would be there, lurking in the background, watching from the shadows. But something else began to happen too. As John watched them, as he became more immersed in their secret world, he started to notice a change in himself. The anger that had once burned inside him had dulled to something quieter, something more complicated. He should have felt betrayed, but instead, he felt something closer to curiosity. And with that curiosity came a kind of acceptance. He didn't want to stop them. He didn't want to break apart what they had. He wanted to be part of it. The thought came to him late one night, as he sat alone in the dark, watching the latest footage from the hidden cameras. Emily was getting ready to meet Matt again, her movements casual, unaware of the fact that John was watching every moment. And as he watched, the realization hit him with a force that made him sit back in his chair. He didn't just want to observe them. He wanted to join them. The idea terrified him at first. It was wrong, twisted, something no normal person would ever consider. But John knew he was far past the point of normal. The more he thought about it, the more it made sense. He had already crossed so many lines. What was one more? In a strange, unsettling way, it felt like the logical next step. He wasn't angry anymore. He wasn't hurt. He was intrigued. And that intrigue had grown into something darker, something that needed to be satisfied. Over the next few days, John's mind spun with the possibilities. How would he bring it up? How would Emily react? Would Matt even be open to the idea? The thought of confronting them with his proposal both terrified and excited him. But one thing was clear, he couldn't go back to the way things were. He had changed. And now, he wanted more. The opportunity came sooner than he expected. One evening, as they sat together on the couch after putting the kids to bed, John decided to test the waters. Emily was scrolling through her phone, her eyes occasionally darting to him as if to check whether he was paying attention. "You've been seeing a lot of Matt lately," John said casually, not looking at her. He could feel her stiffen beside him, her fingers pausing mid-swipe. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. John turned to look at her, his expression calm, almost amused. "You don't have to lie, Emily. I know about you and Matt." Silence filled the room, thick and heavy. Emily's face drained of color, her eyes wide with shock. "John," the first she stammered, but he raised a hand to stop her. "I'm not angry," he said softly, and the truth of his words hit him even as he said them. "In fact, I've known for a while. And I've been watching." Emily's breath hitched, and she stared at him, not sure what to say. "Watching?" she echoed, her voice barely a whisper. "I've seen everything," John continued, his voice calm, almost soothing. "I know what you've been doing with Matt. And the truth is, I don't mind. In fact, I think I might want to be part of it." The room seemed to freeze in that moment, the weight of his words hanging in the air between them. Emily blinked, her mouth opening slightly as if to speak, but no words came out. John felt a strange sense of relief wash over him, as if a burden he had been carrying for weeks had finally been lifted. He had said it. There was no going back now. "John, what are you saying?" Emily finally managed to ask, her voice shaking. John smiled softly, reaching for her hand. "I'm saying that I've been watching you two for a long time. And now, I want to join you." Emily stared at him, her face a mixture of confusion, fear, and something else, something that John couldn't quite read. The silence stretched between them, heavy and thick. She pulled her hand away from his, her fingers trembling slightly. "You want to join us?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as if she wasn't sure she had heard him correctly. John nodded, his heart pounding in his chest, though his outward calm remained intact. "Yes," he said quietly, the word hanging in the air like a secret they both hadn't yet processed. "I've been watching for a while now, and I don't feel the way I thought I would. I don't feel angry or betrayed. I feel curious. I feel like there's more to this than just an affair. And I want to explore that. With you. With Matt." Emily's eyes widened, and for a moment, John thought she might run, might burst into tears or lash out at him. But instead, she just sat there, her expression unreadable. Slowly, she turned away, biting her lip as if weighing the enormity of his words. John felt the tension in the room build to a breaking point. This was it, the moment everything could fall apart or something new could be born. The air between them crackled with uncertainty. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Emily spoke. "I don't know what to say." Her voice was small, fragile. She looked at him, her eyes searching his face for some kind of reassurance. "How long have you known?" John exhaled softly, the truth feeling almost like a release. "A few months," he admitted. "I followed you once, to the hotel. And then I started watching. Setting up cameras. I know it sounds insane, but once I started, I couldn't stop. I needed to know everything." Emily's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes filling with shock and disbelief. "You set up cameras?" She shook her head, trying to process what he was saying. "You've been spying on me?" John leaned forward, his voice gentle. "I didn't do it to hurt you. I needed to understand. I needed to know what was happening between you and Matt. And the more I watched, the more I realized it wasn't about you betraying me. It was about something else. Something I can't explain, but I need to explore it." Emily sat back, her eyes wide and uncertain. "I don't know if Matt would," John interrupted her. "I'll talk to Matt," he said confidently, as if that were the easiest part of all of this. "I just need to know where you stand first. If you're open to it. To all of us together." Emily's breath hitched again, her gaze locking with his. "John, this is crazy," she said, shaking her head. "I don't even know what to think." He reached out and took her hand again, his grip firmer this time. "I know it's crazy. But I've seen the way you look at him. The way you two are together. And I'm not angry about it anymore. I'm curious. I want to understand. I want to be part of it. And I think, maybe you do too." Emily's expression softened, her fingers lightly tightening around his. For the first time since this conversation began, John saw the tension in her face ease, replaced by something that looked almost like relief. She glanced down at their joined hands, then back at him, her lips parting slightly. "You really want this?" John nodded, his voice steady. "I do. I want to try it." Emily closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath before exhaling slowly. When she opened them again, her gaze was steady, her decision made. "Okay," she said softly. "Let's talk to Matt." The days that followed felt surreal to John. He had expected fear, guilt, maybe even shame to creep in as the reality of what he had proposed settled in. But instead, he felt something else entirely, a sense of liberation, of excitement. This was uncharted territory, something beyond anything he had ever imagined, and the thought of it filled him with an electric anticipation. When he finally met with Matt, the conversation unfolded in a way that seemed almost too easy. They met at a bar, as they often did, and after a few drinks, John carefully broached the subject. Matt's initial reaction was shock, followed by a long, uncomfortable silence. But as John explained, as he laid out the months of observation, the watching, and finally, his desire to join them, something in Matt's expression shifted. "Are you serious?" Matt asked, his voice low, disbelief coloring his words. John nodded. "I've never been more serious. I'm not here to break this up, Matt. I just want to understand it, to be part of it. If you're open to that." Matt took a long sip of his drink, his eyes never leaving John's. He seemed to consider it for a long time, the tension between them palpable. Finally, he set his glass down, leaned back in his chair, and let out a slow breath. "All right," he said, his voice calm. "If this is really what you want, I'm in." And just like that, the door had been opened. The night they all came together for the first time was unlike anything John had ever imagined. The tension in the air was thick, almost suffocating, as they sat in the living room, each of them acutely aware of the line they were about to cross. Emily sat next to John, her fingers nervously twisting a lock of hair, while Matt sat across from them, his face unreadable. For a few minutes, no one said anything, the silence heavy with unspoken thoughts. John's heart raced, a mix of anticipation and uncertainty swirling inside him. He had brought them to this moment, but now that it was here, he couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. Would this tear everything apart? Would he regret it the moment they crossed that threshold? Or would it unlock something new, something he hadn't even realized he needed? Emily was the first to break the silence. So what now? Her voice was soft, uncertain, as she glanced between John and Matt. The question lingered in the air, unspoken but clear. How do we even begin? John looked at her, then at Matt, his mind racing for the right words. He had been the one to propose this, the one who had pushed them all into this strange, uncharted territory. Now it was up to him to take the next step. "We take it slow," John said quietly, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions brewing inside him. "We don't have to rush anything. We just see how it feels." Matt leaned back, a faint smile playing on his lips. "You really want this, John?" His tone wasn't mocking, but there was a hint of disbelief in his words, as if he still couldn't quite believe that John was sitting there, asking for this. John nodded. "I do." And it was true. As strange as it felt, as out of place as the situation seemed, deep down, John knew that this was what he wanted. The curiosity that had consumed him for months, the dark pull that had driven him to watch, to spy, to obsess, it was all leading to this moment. And now, he was ready. The first touch was hesitant. Emily reached out, her hand brushing against John's knee, as if testing the waters. John felt a shiver run through him, not from fear, but from something else, something raw, unfiltered. His eyes met hers, and for a brief moment, the years of their marriage, the comfort, the familiarity, all seemed to fade away, replaced by something new. Something dangerous. Matt watched them, his gaze steady, as if waiting for permission to join. John nodded, and with that silent signal, Matt leaned forward, his hand resting on Emily's other leg. The energy in the room shifted, the air crackling with an intensity that John had never felt before. It was like stepping off a cliff, into the unknown. There was no turning back now. What happened next was a blur of sensations, emotions too tangled to fully grasp. John watched as Emily responded to Matt's touch, her body reacting in ways he hadn't seen in years. But instead of jealousy, instead of anger, John felt something different, a sense of liberation, as if by giving up control, he had gained something deeper. He wasn't just an observer anymore. He was part of it. Every movement, every whisper, every shared glance, it all felt like a dance, one that they had unknowingly been rehearsing for months. And as the night went on, the boundaries between them blurred, until there was no longer a clear line between husband, wife, and friend. They were all just together. By the time it was over, the room was quiet again, the intensity of the moment slowly ebbing away like the tide. Emily lay between them, her breathing soft and steady, her face relaxed in a way John hadn't seen in a long time. Matt sat on the edge of the couch, his expression thoughtful, but calm. John stared at the ceiling, his mind racing with thoughts he couldn't fully untangle. What had just happened? And more importantly, what did it mean for them going forward? He didn't feel regret. That surprised him the most. He had expected to wake up from this, to be hit by a wave of guilt, of shame. But instead, there was only a strange sense of peace, of contentment. They had crossed a line, but it hadn't shattered their world. If anything, it had brought them closer. As the days passed, what had happened that night wasn't a one-time thing. It became part of their lives, an unspoken agreement between the three of them. Matt continued to visit, but now the dynamic had changed. They no longer hid anything from each other. There was no more secrecy, no more sneaking around. And for John, that was the most freeing part of all. He no longer had to watch from the shadows, to wonder what was happening behind his back. He was part of it, fully and completely. The jealousy he had once feared never came. Instead, he found himself drawn deeper into this new reality, where the lines between love, desire, and possession were constantly shifting. But with each passing day, John couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed within him. The man he had been before, the husband, the father, the one who had prided himself on control and stability, felt distant now, like a character from a different life. He had stepped into a world where boundaries no longer existed, where the rules of marriage, of relationships, didn't apply in the same way. And while that thrilled him, it also left him with a lingering question: who was he becoming? The curiosity that had first driven him to watch had evolved into something far more complex, something he didn't fully understand. He had embraced this new version of himself, but deep down, he couldn't help but wonder how far it would go, and what it would cost him in the end. John's life had shifted in ways he couldn't have imagined. The nights with Emily and Matt became a regular occurrence, slipping into their routine as naturally as everything else. What had once felt like a forbidden thrill now seemed almost normal. The boundaries that once defined his marriage, his sense of self, had eroded entirely. Yet, with each passing encounter, the satisfaction he once found in watching, in participating, began to fade. What had once excited him, now left him feeling hollow. The quiet moments after their nights together, the stillness, the aftermath, were filled with an emptiness that gnawed at him, one that he couldn't quite place. He thought back to when it all started. Back then, the thrill of discovery, the rush of voyeurism, had consumed him. But now, as he lay in bed at night, staring at the ceiling while Emily slept peacefully beside him, the thrill was gone, replaced by a gnawing void. The question that had been lurking in the back of his mind all along came crashing to the forefront: what now? He had followed the path of his darkest curiosity, crossed every line, indulged every impulse, but now, standing on the other side of it all, he felt nothing. The very thing that had once driven him, that had given him power, had lost its grip. The sense of control, of dominance, had faded into something murkier. He had let go of the jealousy, the anger, but what had replaced it was far worse, a strange, suffocating numbness. He found himself pulling away, emotionally, mentally, from both Emily and Matt. Even during their encounters, his mind would drift elsewhere, no longer captivated by the sight of them together. Instead, he would stare out the window, wondering if this was all there was. How had he ended up here, feeling so disconnected from his own life, from the very people he had once been so obsessed with? One evening, after Matt had left and Emily had gone to bed, John stayed up late, sitting on the couch, a drink in his hand. The house was silent, save for the occasional creak of the wood as the house settled. He stared at the blank TV screen, lost in thought, trying to pinpoint the moment when everything had shifted. The idea of control, of being the one who saw everything, who knew everything, had been intoxicating. But now that he had fully embraced it, he realized just how powerless he truly was. His marriage, his friendship, his sense of self, all of it had been twisted into something unrecognizable. And now, he didn't know how to get back to the person he used to be. He couldn't undo what had been done. There was no going back to the simplicity of ignorance, to the days when he didn't know what was happening between Emily and Matt. He had chosen to dive headfirst into this new reality, and now, he was drowning in it. The next morning, as Emily sat across from him at the breakfast table, sipping her coffee, John looked at her and saw the same woman he had always loved, but different. She was still the mother of his children, his wife, but the intimacy between them had been irreversibly changed. She looked at him and smiled, the same soft smile she had always given him, but it no longer had the same warmth. It was as if they were both pretending, going through the motions of their old lives, even though they both knew they had left those lives behind. "You're quiet today," Emily said, breaking the silence, her voice soft and curious. John forced a smile, shaking his head slightly. "Just thinking," he replied, his tone distant. He wasn't ready to say what was really on his mind, not yet. But the realization was there, hovering over him like a storm cloud. That evening, as they sat together in the living room, John finally broke the silence. "Emily," he said quietly, his voice steady but heavy with the weight of his thoughts. She looked at him, sensing the seriousness in his tone. "What is it?" John hesitated for a moment, searching for the right words. "I don't think I can do this anymore," he said softly. The words hung in the air between them, sinking in slowly. Emily's expression shifted, her eyes widening slightly in surprise. "Do what?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. John sighed, running a hand through his hair, feeling the tension in his chest. "This. Us. Matt. All of it," he said, his voice low. "I thought this was what I wanted. I thought it would give me something I needed, but now, I don't know who I am anymore. I feel like I've lost myself." Emily's face softened, her eyes filled with a mix of understanding and sadness. "John," she began, but he shook his head, cutting her off gently. "It's not your fault," he said quickly. "I'm the one who pushed for this. I'm the one who wanted to see how far we could go. But now that we've gone there, I don't think I can keep doing this. I need to find myself again. I need to figure out who I am without all of this." Emily looked down at her hands, silent for a long moment. "I understand," she finally whispered, her voice barely audible. "I've felt it too. The change. The distance." She looked up at him, tears welling in her eyes. "What do we do now?" John stared at her, feeling the weight of her question pressing down on him. He didn't have an answer. For so long, he had been consumed by the thrill of their secret, by the allure of the unknown. But now, standing on the other side, all he could see was the wreckage it had left behind. "I don't know," he admitted quietly. "But I think we need to take a step back. We need to figure out who we are, without Matt. Without all of this." Emily nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks as she reached for his hand. "I don't want to lose you, John," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I don't want to lose us." John squeezed her hand gently, his heart heavy. "I don't want to lose us either," he whispered. "But we need to find ourselves again. We need to rebuild. Together." And so, as the silence settled over them once more, John knew that this was the beginning of something new. Not the life they had before, but something different. Something real. Secret desires. How passion freed our marriage. David and Emily were in the back seat. I was sitting in the front passenger seat, staring out the window, but my thoughts were far away. The tension in the car grew heavier, like an electric charge in the air. I knew what was happening behind me, even without turning around. The passion that had burned in Emily's eyes all evening had finally been unleashed. But what surprised me most was my own feelings. Instead of jealousy or anger, all I felt was anticipation, an eagerness for what was to come. When I finally turned my head, I saw her, Emily, the woman I had spent so many years with, lowering her head to David's lap. The sight of it hit me like lightning, but not with anger. Instead, a wild, untamed passion stirred within me, something I hadn't felt in years. I heard the faint sounds of her lips, her breathing growing more labored. Every movement was like fuel to the fire, igniting something inside me that I had been trying to suppress. I quickly turned away, my heart pounding, as if I had witnessed something forbidden, something I wasn't supposed to see. But I couldn't resist. I wanted to look again, to see it all unfold. I glanced back once more, this time for longer. Emily's face was focused, her body alive with desire, and as I watched her, watched them, I felt something break inside me. I thought I would be shocked, but instead, I felt a strange sense of pleasure. I was drawn to this moment, captivated by the sight of my wife giving herself to another man. The closer we got to our destination, the more the tension inside me grew. It wasn't just desire, though that was certainly part of it. It was something deeper. The thought that I was a part of this, that I could watch, could allow it to happen, filled me with a sense of power I hadn't felt in a long time. My breaths were shallow, my skin burned. I could barely sit still, gripping the edge of the seat, waiting for my moment, when the three of us would finally be alone. A wild passion raged inside me, as if released from all constraints. Each time I looked at them, the fire inside me grew stronger, burning away all doubts and hesitation. All that was left was raw desire. The desire to see them, to join them, to lose myself in this new world we had created together. As her lips continued their dance and David's body responded to her, I realized that watching was no longer enough. I wanted to be there, with them, to share in the pleasure unfolding before my eyes. Every second felt like an eternity as I sat there, barely able to contain myself. I could hear my heart pounding in my chest, the blood pulsing in my temples. We were just minutes away now, and I couldn't wait any longer. I needed it. The thought of what would come next, of the three of us together, fueled the fire inside me until it was the only thing I could think about. My body ached for release, for the moment when I would no longer be an observer but become part of this, when I would step into their world. Now, I'll start the story from the very beginning and explain how it all happened. John and Emily had always been the embodiment of the American dream. A happy, stable couple who had built their life together from the ground up. Both in their early 50s, they had been together since they were barely adults, getting married when they were only 20. Over the years, they had faced the typical challenges of raising children, managing careers, and building a home. Their love had weathered the storms of life, from sleepless nights with newborns to the stresses of maintaining a career while balancing family obligations. Together, they had seen their children grow, move out, and begin families of their own. The house that once echoed with laughter, arguments, and the endless noise of everyday life had grown quiet. Too quiet, perhaps. The silence between them wasn't cold, but it was heavy. It was the kind of silence that comes with time, where words seem less necessary because you've already said them all. John and Emily had always loved each other, but the intensity of that love had gradually dulled. Passion had given way to comfort, routine, and familiarity. The days of spontaneous romance, late-night conversations, and shared dreams had become distant memories. Now, they lived in a rhythm that felt more like coasting than living. Their love, though still present, had settled into something safe, predictable, and perhaps too comfortable. John felt it more keenly with each passing day. There were moments, fleeting but powerful, where he caught himself wondering, is this it? He loved Emily, of course he did. But there was a part of him that missed the way things had been when they were younger, when every touch sparked something electric, when every glance was filled with unspoken words. The passion that had once defined their relationship had long since faded, replaced by the steady hum of everyday life. Their intimacy had become rare, reserved for occasional moments that felt more like obligations than acts of love. The kisses were routine, the embraces brief, and the conversations were about everything but each other. John had begun to feel something inside him stir, a quiet restlessness that he didn't fully understand. He didn't know what he wanted exactly, but he knew that the comfort of their routine wasn't enough anymore. He missed the fire, the unpredictability, the feeling of being consumed by love and desire. Now, every touch felt rehearsed, every kiss familiar but empty. He longed for more, even if he couldn't quite put that longing into words. The life they had built was stable, secure, and filled with the accomplishments of raising a family and growing old together. But somewhere along the way, John had lost sight of who they were as a couple, as individuals. The love was still there, but the excitement, the raw emotion that had once filled every corner of their life, had slipped through their fingers like sand. As much as he tried to ignore it, John couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, that there was a part of him, of them, that had been left behind in the busyness of life. John spent a long time gathering the courage to talk to his wife. The idea of having such a direct and vulnerable conversation weighed heavily on him for weeks. He didn't want to hurt Emily, and he wasn't sure how she would react to the suggestion that something was missing between them. Yet, deep down, he knew that if he didn't talk about it, the distance between them would only grow. So he waited for the right moment, hoping that the conversation would somehow flow naturally. One evening, after the kids had left following a family dinner, and the house was quiet, John saw his chance. He poured 2 glasses of wine and joined Emily on the couch, his mind racing with thoughts of how to begin. They sat together in a comfortable silence for a while, sipping their wine, but John could feel the tension building in his chest. He knew he had to say something before the moment passed. Taking a deep breath, he finally spoke. "Emily," he began, his voice steady but soft, "I've been thinking a lot lately about us, about our marriage." Emily looked at him, her brow furrowing slightly, sensing the seriousness in his tone. "What do you mean?" she asked, setting her glass down on the coffee table, giving him her full attention. John hesitated for a moment, searching for the right words. "I love you. You know that," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "But I feel like something's changed between us. Like we've fallen into this routine, and I miss how things used to be. I miss the passion we had." Emily didn't say anything at first. She just watched him, her expression unreadable. John felt his heart race. It was harder than he had imagined. "Opening up like this? I don't want us to lose each other," he continued. "I've been talking to some friends, and they suggested that maybe we could try something new. Something that could bring back the excitement." He paused, feeling nervous about what he was about to say next. "I just want us to be honest with each other, to not hide anything. I think we need to start talking about our desires, our needs, even the ones we don't always talk about." Emily was silent for a long moment, processing his words. John's chest tightened, worried that he had gone too far, that he had opened up a conversation that could lead to places neither of them were prepared to go. But then Emily sighed softly, picking up her glass of wine again and taking a slow sip before speaking. "I've felt it too," she admitted, her voice quiet. "I've been feeling like something's missing, but I didn't know how to bring it up. I didn't want to hurt you, John." Her honesty surprised him, and for the first time in a while, John felt a sense of relief wash over him. They were on the same page, after all. "So," Emily continued, meeting his eyes again, "what exactly are you suggesting?" John took another deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "I'm saying that maybe we should be more open with each other. About everything. Our desires, our fantasies, things we've been afraid to talk about." He hesitated for a moment, then added, "We don't have to hide anything from each other anymore. Whatever we want, we should feel safe enough to talk about it." Emily looked thoughtful, her eyes softening as she considered his words. "It's going to be hard," she said quietly, "but if we're honest with each other, maybe it could help us find that spark again." She gave him a small smile, and for the first time that night, John felt a flicker of hope. They had taken the first step, and though the conversation had been difficult, it was the most honest and open they had been with each other in years. "Okay," Emily said after a pause, "let's promise to always be truthful. No more secrets, no more hiding what we really want. We talk, and we listen to each other." John nodded, reaching out to take her hand. "No more secrets," he agreed. For the first time in a long time, he felt like they were on the same path, ready to explore whatever came next, together. John felt a mixture of emotions as the conversation unfolded. On the one hand, he was relieved that Emily hadn't reacted negatively to his confession, that she, too, felt the same void between them. But on the other hand, there was something stirring deep inside him, something he couldn't quite name. He wasn't sure what he wanted, or even how far he was willing to go to bring back the passion they had lost. But one thing was clear. Whatever came next, it had to be different. The very thought of stepping out of their comfortable, predictable life both terrified and intrigued him. As they sat in silence for a few moments, John's mind raced. The idea of complete openness between them was daunting. He had never thought about sharing his deepest desires, his fantasies, with Emily. Not in this way. But now, Faced with the possibility of true honesty, he realized that part of him craved it. He wasn't entirely sure what that meant, but he felt drawn to it, as if some unspoken part of himself had been waiting for this moment all along. Emily broke the silence, her voice soft but steady. "There's something I've been thinking about," she admitted, her fingers fidgeting slightly with the stem of her wine glass. "Something I've never told you because I didn't know how you'd react." John's heart raced, and his palms felt slightly clammy as he watched her closely, sensing the weight of what she was about to say. "What is it?" he asked, his voice calm, though inside, his mind was spinning. Emily took a deep breath before continuing, her gaze dropping to her lap for a moment before meeting his eyes again. "I've thought about us being with someone else," she said, her words careful, deliberate. "Together. I mean, with another partner. It's just something that's crossed my mind, but I didn't know if you'd ever be open to something like that." For a split second, John didn't know how to react. His mind froze, trying to process what she had just said. A part of him wanted to be shocked, wanted to feel some kind of resistance to the idea, but instead, he felt something else, an odd sense of excitement. It wasn't a thought he had ever entertained seriously before, but as soon as Emily said the words, it was as if a door had been opened inside him. The very idea of it, the possibility, sent a thrill through him, one he hadn't expected. His emotions swirled. He wasn't entirely sure what he wanted, but hearing Emily express a desire for something so daring, so different, stirred something inside him that had long been dormant. "You've thought about that?" he asked quietly, his voice more curious than surprised. Emily nodded, her expression tentative, as if waiting for him to judge her. "Yes," she admitted. "I didn't want to hide it anymore. I want to be honest with you, like we promised." John took a moment to collect his thoughts. He could feel his heart beating faster, a mix of uncertainty and intrigue coursing through him. This wasn't what he had expected when he started the conversation, but now that the idea was out in the open, he couldn't ignore the pull it had on him. "I don't know if I ever thought about it like that," he said honestly, "but maybe it's something we could explore together." As the words left his mouth, John realized just how much he wanted this. Wanted to break free from the old routines, to feel something new, something real again. The uncertainty was still there, of course, but mixed with it was an undeniable sense of anticipation. What Emily had proposed felt like a door opening to a world they had never considered before, and though it was daunting, John couldn't shake the feeling that it might be exactly what they needed. For the first time in a long time, John felt a surge of emotion that was both terrifying and exhilarating. He didn't know what would come next, but in that moment, he knew that he was ready to find out. John and David spent the next week exchanging messages, carefully discussing every detail. Their conversations were thoughtful, deliberate, and at times, surprisingly candid. John found himself drawn to David's approach. He wasn't just a willing participant. He was intelligent and insightful, taking time to consider how this arrangement would work for all of them. David's curiosity matched John's, and it became clear that, for him, this wasn't just an adventure but an opportunity to explore something new and meaningful. David's calm, mature demeanor put John at ease. He was direct, but respectful, understanding the delicacy of the situation. "I've never done anything quite like this before," David admitted in one of their messages, "but I'm intrigued. It feels like an experience we can all learn from." His words resonated with John, who had been searching for exactly that. A way to bring something fresh and meaningful into their lives, something that would challenge their old patterns but in a thoughtful, controlled way. As the days went by, John grew more confident about the decision. The more they talked, the clearer it became that David was the right choice. He wasn't impulsive or reckless. He understood the complexity of what they were about to step into. This wasn't just about physical intimacy. It was about trust, openness, and exploring something that could potentially deepen the connection between John and Emily. The excitement, once tinged with uncertainty, began to settle into anticipation as the three of them prepared to take the next step. David and Emily sat in the back seat, their quiet whispers and occasional laughter barely audible over the soft hum of the taxi engine. I sat in the front, staring out the window at the city lights as they slowly blurred past, but I wasn't seeing them. My mind was too occupied with everything that was happening behind me. I didn't need to turn around to know that something was unfolding between them. Something intimate, charged with a passion I hadn't seen in Emily in years. It was as if I could feel it in the air, the subtle shifts in her breathing, the soft movements of her body as she leaned closer to David. I tried to keep my focus on the road ahead, but it was impossible. The tension inside the car was thick, almost suffocating, and yet I was drawn to it, consumed by the pull of what was happening just a few feet behind me. Each second seemed to stretch out longer than the last, and with every passing moment, the anticipation in my chest grew. My fingers tapped restlessly against my leg, my pulse quickening as I imagined what I couldn't see. For a brief moment, I thought about turning around, about watching them. The thought sent a rush of heat through me, not of anger, but of curiosity. An almost overwhelming desire to witness what was happening, to see Emily's face, to see how she responded to David's touch. I had already convinced myself that I wasn't the jealous type, that this was what we both wanted. But now, in the stillness of the car, it was something else. I didn't just want to observe. I wanted to be part of it, to immerse myself in the intensity that seemed to flow between them. As I sat there, my breath becoming more shallow, I couldn't help but reflect on how strange this all was, how far we had come from where we started. I had spent so much time in the past few years feeling disconnected from Emily, feeling like the passion we once had was a distant memory. But now, sitting in this car, knowing what was happening behind me, I felt more alive than I had in years. It was as if a fire had been rekindled inside me, burning brighter with every moment I allowed myself to be drawn into the reality of this new world we were stepping into. The car felt smaller with every passing second, the space between us tightening, becoming almost unbearable. My mind was racing, torn between the tension of wanting to look and the restraint of keeping my eyes forward. Every time Emily shifted in her seat, my pulse would spike, as if her movements were directly connected to my heartbeat. I could feel the weight of what we were about to do pressing down on me, but instead of fear or doubt, there was only excitement. A raw, electric charge that coursed through me, making every nerve in my body hum with anticipation. I could hear her now, her voice soft and playful as she whispered something to David. There was a lightness in her tone, a kind of freedom I hadn't heard from her in years. It wasn't forced, wasn't weighed down by the routines of our daily lives. It was pure, unfiltered joy, and knowing that she felt this way only heightened my own anticipation. I glanced at the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of her face. Her lips slightly parted, her eyes half closed, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't just doing this for her. I was doing it for myself too. This was a part of me, a desire I hadn't fully understood until now. The tension in my chest was building, rising with every breath, and as we neared the hotel, I felt the weight of the moment settle over me. This wasn't just an idea anymore, wasn't just something we had talked about. It was real, and we were minutes away from stepping into it. I could feel the taxi slowing down, the bright lights of the hotel coming into view as we pulled into the parking lot. My heart was racing now, pounding in my chest as the car came to a stop. I glanced over at the entrance, the neon sign flickering in the distance, and knew that once we stepped out of the car, there was no turning back. As I opened the door and stepped onto the pavement, the cool night air hit my face, doing little to calm the storm of emotions raging inside me. I turned and watched as Emily and David got out of the car. Emily's face was lit up with a smile, her eyes sparkling with a passion that I hadn't seen in so long. She looked alive, vibrant, as if something had awakened in her, something that had been dormant for years. Her eyes met mine for a brief moment, and I saw the same fire in her gaze that I felt burning inside of me. It was more than just excitement. It was a hunger, a desire that we were both ready to explore. David stood beside her, calm and collected, his presence grounding the moment in a way that felt reassuring. He looked at me, gave a small nod, as if silently acknowledging the significance of what we were about to do. And as we walked toward the entrance of the hotel, the three of us together, I felt the anticipation grow even stronger, the tension in my chest tightening with every step. This was it, the night that would change everything. The night we would finally cross the threshold into something new. That night in the hotel was unlike anything I had ever experienced. The moment we stepped into the room, the air seemed to shift, charged with anticipation, excitement, and a sense of the unknown. The walls of the small, dimly lit room seemed to close in around us, not in a suffocating way, but in a way that heightened every sense, every touch, every glance. There was a weight to the moment, but it wasn't heavy with fear or anxiety. It was heavy with the thrill of crossing into something entirely new, something we had all been waiting for. Emily looked radiant. The way her eyes sparkled in the low light, the soft curve of her lips as she smiled, made her seem more alive than I had seen her in years. There was a freedom in her movements, a joy that spilled out of her with every step she took toward the bed. I could see the way she looked at David, and for the first time, I didn't feel any jealousy. In fact, I felt exhilarated. Watching her, watching them together, stirred something deep inside me that I hadn't expected. It was as if all the tension, all the anticipation that had built up over the past few weeks was finally being released, and instead of feeling threatened or insecure, I felt empowered. David, too, seemed at ease. His calm, composed demeanor had a grounding effect on both of us, making the experience feel even more natural, more fluid. He wasn't rushing anything. Every movement he made was deliberate, thoughtful, as if he understood the weight of the moment and was savoring every second of it. His hands were gentle but firm as they touched Emily, and each time she responded, I could feel my own pulse quicken, my body reacting in ways I hadn't anticipated. I had thought this moment might feel awkward, forced even, but it wasn't. It felt right. It felt exhilarating. Emily's laughter filled the room at one point, light and carefree, breaking the silence and making the air between us feel even more electric. I watched as David's hands moved across her skin, his touch sending shivers down her spine, and I could see her whole body come alive beneath him. Her eyes fluttered closed, and I knew she was lost in the moment, in the pleasure of it all. But what surprised me most was how much I was enjoying it too. Watching her, being a part of it, feeling the energy that seemed to pulse between the three of us. I found myself stepping closer, my own breathing shallow, my body drawn into the intensity of what was happening. When my hands finally reached out, touching Emily's skin as well, it was as if the last barrier between us had dissolved. We were no longer three separate people. We were one, connected by something more than just physical desire. There was a deeper connection, a shared experience that went beyond anything I had imagined. It was intimate in a way I hadn't thought possible, not just between Emily and me, but between all three of us. As the night unfolded, time seemed to lose its meaning. Every moment felt stretched, elongated, as if the hours passed in slow motion, each touch, each breath, each moan magnified in the stillness of the room. My senses were heightened. Every sound, every movement resonated deep within me. I could hear the soft gasps escaping from Emily's lips, feel the heat of David's body as we moved together, see the pleasure written across Emily's face as she gave herself fully to the moment. And the strangest thing was, instead of feeling like an outsider, I felt more connected to her than ever before. The pleasure wasn't just physical. It was emotional, almost spiritual. There was something liberating about letting go of everything we had known before, stepping into a space where there were no rules, no expectations, just raw, unfiltered connection. I felt my body respond to both of them, the tension in my muscles releasing with each passing moment, my mind quieting as I gave in to the experience. The doubts, the fears, the questions, they all melted away, leaving only the pure sensation of being fully present in the moment. At one point, I looked into Emily's eyes, and the way she looked back at me made my heart race. There was love there, but also something else, something deeper, more primal. It was as if we had crossed a boundary together, stepped into a new phase of our relationship where everything was open, everything was possible. She wasn't just my wife anymore. She was my partner in this new journey, and I realized that this was what we had been missing for so long. The passion, the fire, the excitement, it was all here, waiting for us to claim it. David, too, was completely in sync with us. He moved with a grace and confidence that put both of us at ease, and his presence felt like the missing piece to a puzzle we hadn't known we were trying to solve. He wasn't just a third person. He was part of the experience, part of the connection that we had formed together. And as the night went on, it became clear that this wasn't just a fleeting moment of excitement. It was something deeper, something that had changed all of us. When it was all over, the room fell into a peaceful silence, the air thick with the afterglow of what had just happened. I lay there, my body still humming with the remnants of pleasure, my mind calm for the first time in what felt like forever. Emily lay beside me, her head resting on my chest, and for the first time in years, I felt truly connected to her. Not just as her husband, but as her partner, her equal. David sat at the edge of the bed, his breathing slowing as he looked at both of us, a satisfied smile on his face. Emily's eyes met mine, and in that moment, I knew we had found what we had been searching for. Her smile was soft, but her eyes were still alight with the passion and desire that had carried us through the night. She looked alive, fully alive, in a way I hadn't seen in years, and as I looked at her, I realized that I felt the same way. We had stepped into something new, something that had reignited the fire we thought we had lost. It wasn't just about the physical pleasure. It was about the connection, the freedom, the understanding that we were both capable of so much more than we had ever realized. That night, everything changed. It wasn't just a night of passion. It was a night of discovery, of rediscovery, of finding out that we were still capable of love, of desire, of excitement. And as we lay there together, the three of us, I knew that this was just the beginning. After that night, everything changed. Their family life seemed to come alive, filled with new colors and emotions they hadn't felt in years. John and Emily no longer felt the oppressive weight of routine, the feeling that something was missing. Instead, their lives were now filled with passion, honesty, and a deep understanding of each other. They both knew what they wanted and weren't afraid to talk about it openly. Every morning started with new sensations. Every conversation was steeped in honesty and emotional connection. They no longer pretended to be content spouses while suppressing their true desires. Instead, they had opened up to each other fully, without fear of judgment or rejection. What began as an experiment to bring passion back into their lives had become a powerful source of freedom and closeness. John felt his love for Emily transform into something more mature, more profound. He loved her not just as his wife, but as his partner in this new journey. Now they shared not only love, but their fantasies, their desires. Their bond grew stronger than ever. Emily, in turn, embraced the new experience with the same freedom and passion. She felt more confident, more liberated in her desires. Their relationship now had a sense of novelty, as if they were discovering each other all over again with each new encounter. While that experience with David had brought them closer, it was only the beginning of their new path. They were now ready for more, for new experiences that would enrich their lives. They had learned to speak to each other without fear or shame, understanding that in their marriage, there were no longer boundaries, no hidden desires or forbidden topics. Each new meeting, each new conversation now opened up endless possibilities. Their passion had been reborn and had grown into something greater, something that gave them a sense of freedom and incredible closeness. Instead of fearing that they might lose each other, they realized that through this experience, they had found each other again. And now, every night, every day, everything had become bright and full of life. They no longer felt the emptiness. Now their lives were filled with passion, freedom, and a boundless love that knew no limits. John stood on the edge of the room, blending into the shadows, his breath shallow and deliberate, his gaze fixed on the scene unfolding before him. Matt's fingers tracing delicate patterns across Emily's skin, movements filled with a tenderness John hadn't felt in years. The closeness between them was undeniable, and when Matt whispered something inaudible into her ear, Emily smiled, a smile that seemed so effortless, so genuine, as if she was exactly where she belonged. Matt's lips brushed her neck, and she responded by leaning into him, her entire body melting into the moment, as though everything else ceased to exist. Watching this, John felt a surge of emotion rise within him, a storm brewing under the surface. At first, it was anger, raw and consuming. This was his wife, his friend, and together they had crossed a line he never thought possible. His fists clenched involuntarily, and the urge to charge in, to confront them both, to tear apart their illusion, grew stronger with every passing second. He could feel his pulse in his throat, each heartbeat louder than the last, convinced that any moment now, they would hear him. His mind screamed for action, for justice, but his body refused to move. He remained frozen in place, watching, waiting. Then, something unexpected began to shift inside him. The fury that had gripped him so tightly started to lose its hold, giving way to an emotion far more complex. As his eyes followed their movements, Matt's hands, Emily's responses, he felt an odd, unsettling sensation. A strange pleasure, one he couldn't quite name, began to surface. He should have been in agony, drowning in betrayal, but instead, there was something else, a pull, a captivation, as if the very scene he dreaded was now holding him in its thrall. With each soft touch, each whispered word, his anger slowly faded, replaced by a fascination that defied explanation. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional, something deep within him stirring in response to what he saw. John's thoughts spiraled. How could he feel this way? How could something so wrong fill him with such intensity? Torn between the moral outrage he knew he should feel and the strange allure that kept him rooted to the spot, he stood there, motionless. Inside, a battle raged between his understanding of what was right and the undeniable pull of his own desires, desires he had never known existed. That moment was the beginning of everything, the moment when the lines between love, betrayal, and desire blurred beyond recognition. What started as anger transformed into something darker, deeper, and far more complex. And instead of running, instead of ending it all, John chose to stay, to watch, to let the story unfold in a way he could never have imagined. Sitting on the back porch, John nursed a beer, the warmth of the evening sun brushing against his skin as it set behind the hills. His kids' laughter echoed across the lawn, a comforting sound in the midst of his turmoil. It should have been a perfect evening. The scent of barbecue from nearby homes, the steady hum of sprinklers, the light breeze. This was the dream, wasn't it? A family, a home, the kind of life anyone would envy. Yet, beneath the surface, something was wrong. John stood on the edge of the room, blending into the shadows, his breath shallow and deliberate, his gaze fixed on the scene unfolding before him. Matt's fingers tracing delicate patterns across it wasn't anything obvious, at least not at first. There were no screaming matches, no dramatic confrontations, just a slow, creeping distance. Emily seemed different, distracted, always glued to her phone, notifications flashing more frequently than before, always when she thought he wasn't paying attention. They used to talk after the kids went to bed, sharing their day, savoring the quiet moments together. But now, those moments were rare, nearly gone. Emily would retreat early, offering excuses about being tired, disappearing into their bedroom with her phone in hand, leaving John to wonder when everything had changed. He kept telling himself it was nothing. People change with time. Marriage settles into routine, right? That's what everyone said. Friends, family. After years together, couples start to take things for granted. It's normal, they said. But even as John repeated those words in his mind, a creeping unease gnawed at him. Every time Emily's laughter sounded a little too forced, every time her smile seemed too perfect, the knot in his stomach tightened. A quiet voice, buried deep, whispered that something wasn't right. And it wasn't just Emily. Matt, his best friend, had been around a lot more recently. Matt had always been part of their lives, almost like family, showing up at every barbecue, every game night, every casual evening after the kids went to bed. He and John had been inseparable since college, their friendship unshakable through all life's ups and downs. But lately, John noticed something different. Small things too subtle to confront, but too obvious to ignore. The way Emily and Matt exchanged looks, as if sharing some unspoken secret. The way their smiles lingered just a little too long. It's nothing, he told himself again and again. They've always been close. It's normal for friends to be comfortable like that, isn't it? But once doubt seeped in, it started to spread, slowly, quietly, until it was all he could think about. One night, after Emily had gone to bed, John sat alone in the living room. The flicker of the television cast shifting shadows across the walls, though he wasn't really watching. His mind wandered, retracing the same thoughts over and over. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. He reached for it automatically, but his attention shifted to Emily's phone, left charging on the table across the room. It buzzed again. John froze, his heart pounding louder with each passing second. He wasn't the type to check her phone, he never had been. But tonight, something felt different. The buzzing phone cut through the silence of the house, making his stomach twist with an unfamiliar dread. He stared at it for what felt like an eternity, every nerve in his body on edge. His heart hammered in his chest, urging him to leave it alone. Yet, his hands moved on their own, almost as if guided by something beyond his control. Before he knew it, he had Emily's phone in his hand. The screen lit up, and there it was, a message from Matt. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow." John's breath caught in his throat. His eyes locked on the message, his mind struggling to process the words. He read it once, twice, over and over, hoping that maybe he had misunderstood. But there it was, clear and undeniable. A whirlwind of thoughts exploded in his mind. Fury surged through him, hot and blinding. He should storm into the bedroom, confront Emily, demand answers. His hands shook, muscles tense, ready to act. But instead of charging upstairs, John remained rooted to the spot. The anger he expected, the outrage he should have felt, it was there, but it didn't control him. Not this time. Something else, something darker, took hold of him. Curiosity. It clawed at his mind, demanding answers, but in a way he had never imagined. What had really been happening between them? How long had it been going on? He needed to know, but the questions swirled in his head like a storm, and instead of confronting the situation head-on, he did nothing. He just stood there, staring at the phone, consumed by a sickening mix of confusion and intrigue. That night, John didn't go to Emily. He didn't confront her. He didn't demand an explanation. He simply waited. The next few days passed in a fog. The message from Matt echoed in his mind, a constant reminder of the secret he now carried. Yet, despite the weight of what he had discovered, he couldn't bring himself to act. His every instinct told him to confront her, to end it all, but something else held him back. Instead, he began to watch, to observe every interaction, every glance, every movement with a careful eye, as though the answers might reveal themselves if he looked closely enough. Quietly, without uttering a single word, John became an observer in his own life, studying Emily with a level of attention he had never given before. Her movements seemed different now, deliberate, cautious. He noticed how she glanced at her phone more often, her lips curling into a faint smile at messages she would quickly hide. She'd mention plans with friends or work, but when pressed for details, she always seemed vague, distant. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but to John, each moment felt like a clue in an unraveling mystery. It was as if a fog had lifted from his eyes. The world he thought he knew, the life he had built with Emily, was now exposed under a different light. Every look she exchanged with Matt at their usual get-togethers carried a weight he hadn't seen before. Each time they shared a private laugh, touched hands for just a moment too long, or exchanged knowing smiles, it felt like they were communicating in a language only they understood. And the most disturbing part? John didn't feel the fury he expected. Instead, something darker stirred within him, a sick fascination, growing stronger by the day. He should be furious. Any normal husband would be. He should be making plans, thinking about what came next, maybe confronting them, maybe even ending it all. But the anger, the instinct for justice, wasn't there. Instead, John found himself sinking deeper into this twisted game, drawn in by an urge to know more, to see more. One evening, as Emily was showering, the temptation became too much. John reached for her phone again, unlocking it with the same ease as before. This time, his hands were steady, his pulse calm, as if the act had already become a part of his routine. He scrolled through her messages, his breath catching in his throat. There they were, conversations with Matt, full of teasing jokes and subtle flirtations. Some messages could be dismissed as harmless, but others hinted at something far more intimate. Inside jokes and then proof. A message from Matt, sent just a few days earlier. "I had a great time the other night. We should do it again soon." John felt his stomach twist into a knot, but the rage he expected didn't come. Instead, there was clarity, a cold, sharp understanding that this was the truth he had been avoiding. He had known deep down for some time now. He just hadn't been ready to see it. Now, there was no denying it. The betrayal was laid bare in front of him. Yet, as he stared at the screen, a whirlwind of emotions tore through him. Why wasn't he furious? Why wasn't he reacting like any other man in his situation? The realization hit him slowly, creeping into his mind like a shadow. He didn't want to confront Emily. He didn't want the shouting, the tears, the accusations that would follow. What he wanted was to see more, to understand it fully. He wanted to witness their secret moments, to know the depths of their betrayal, not out of pain, but out of a morbid curiosity. A part of him longed to stand on the outside, watching it unfold, knowing that they thought they were hiding. And that thought, that forbidden glimpse into their hidden world, brought an unexpected thrill that made his heart race. As the water stopped running in the bathroom and the sound of Emily's footsteps approached, John put her phone back in its place. He had made a decision. He wasn't going to confront them, not yet. He wanted to see where this would go. The following week passed in a strange haze, every moment filled with tension and anticipation. John observed Emily more closely than ever, pretending not to notice when she made up flimsy excuses to leave the house. An errand here, a quick meeting with a friend there. He played along, smiling, nodding, acting as if everything was fine. But underneath the facade, his curiosity burned hotter with each passing day. He had to know what she was doing when she wasn't with him. He needed to know. It didn't take long for John to piece it together. Emily and Matt weren't being as careful as they thought, and John's instincts had always been sharp. He watched, waited, and when the time was right, he followed. One Saturday afternoon, when Emily mentioned she'd be out running errands, John waited until she left, then quietly slipped out behind her. His heart thudded in his chest as he drove a few cars back, the thrill of the chase mingling with the pit of dread that had settled in his stomach. He knew where she was going before she even pulled into the parking lot. A small, secluded hotel on the outskirts of town. The truth, once a distant whisper, was now undeniable, staring him in the face. And yet, instead of breaking him, it pulled him in deeper. There was no mistaking it now. This was where it all happened. John parked a safe distance away, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He watched Emily step out of the car, her eyes darting around nervously before she walked inside. His heart pounded in his chest, his breath shallow, as he waited. Moments later, Matt's car pulled up, and John's best friend casually strolled into the same hotel, unaware of the eyes watching him from a distance. For a brief moment, John considered rushing in, confronting them both, exposing their secret, shattering everything. But the thought passed as quickly as it came. Instead, he remained in the car, his pulse racing, his mind spinning with a mix of dread and anticipation. He couldn't tear his eyes away. That night, as John left the hotel, he felt something shift inside him. He had crossed a line he knew he could never come back from. Yet, the guilt he expected to feel never arrived. Instead, a strange sense of liberation washed over him. As if by watching them, he had discovered something new about himself, something he hadn't known was there. The drive home was silent, the events of the night replaying in his mind like scenes from a movie. Emily and Matt had no idea he had been there, just a few feet away, observing their every move. And that secret knowledge gave John a power he had never felt before. The days that followed were surreal. On the surface, everything was the same. Emily smiled at him across the dinner table, kissed him on the cheek before bed, played with the kids like nothing had changed. But for John, everything had changed. Every word she spoke, every glance she gave him, was now laced with a hidden meaning he couldn't ignore. She wasn't just his wife anymore. She was the woman he was watching, the woman whose secrets he held in his hands. And that secret thrilled him. John's curiosity began to grow into something darker. It wasn't just about catching them in the act anymore. It was about feeding this twisted need that had taken root inside him. He started setting up more cameras, hiding them in places where he could watch without being seen. He became obsessed with their meetings, waiting eagerly for the next time Emily would make an excuse to leave the house. Each time she texted Matt, each time they made plans to meet, John was there, lurking in the shadows, watching their every move. But as the days passed, John noticed something else. Something within him was changing. The anger that had once burned inside him had dulled into a quieter, more complicated emotion. He should have felt betrayed, devastated, furious. But instead, he felt something closer to curiosity. A morbid curiosity that grew stronger with each passing day. And with that curiosity came a strange, unsettling acceptance. He didn't want to stop them. He didn't want to break apart what they had. He wanted to be a part of it. The thought hit him late one night, as he sat alone in the dark, watching the latest footage from the hidden cameras. Emily was getting ready to meet Matt again. Her movements casual and unaware that John was watching her every move. And as he watched, the realization struck him. He didn't just want to observe them. He wanted to be involved. The idea terrified him at first. How could he want something so twisted, so wrong? But he had already crossed so many lines. What was one more? It felt like the next logical step in this dark, twisted journey. Over the next few days, John's mind spun with possibilities. How would he bring it up? How would Emily react? Would Matt even be open to the idea? The very thought of confronting them with his proposal both terrified and excited him. But one thing was clear. There was no going back to the way things were. He had changed, and now he wanted more. The opportunity came sooner than he expected. One evening, after the kids were in bed, John and Emily sat on the couch, the room filled with the soft hum of the TV in the background. Emily was scrolling through her phone, her eyes flicking to him occasionally, as if to check whether he was paying attention. "You've been spending a lot of time with Matt lately," John said, his tone casual, his gaze fixed on the TV. He felt her stiffen beside him, her fingers pausing mid-swipe on her phone. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice careful, trying to sound neutral. John turned to her, his expression calm, almost amused. "You don't have to lie, Emily. I know about you and Matt." The silence that followed was thick, heavy, almost suffocating. Emily's face paled, her eyes wide with shock, her lips parting as if to say something, but no words came out. The truth hung between them, undeniable, and John felt a strange satisfaction settle over him. He wasn't angry, he wasn't hurt, he was intrigued, and now the game had truly begun. "David, she stammered, but he raised a hand to stop her. "I'm not angry," he said softly, the words almost surprising him as they left his mouth. "In fact, I've known for some time, and I've been watching." Sarah's breath hitched, her eyes wide as she stared at him, unsure of how to respond. "Watching?" she echoed, her voice barely audible. "I've seen everything," David continued, his voice calm, almost comforting. "I know what you've been doing with Mark, and, to be honest, I don't mind. In fact, I think I might want to be part of it." The room seemed to freeze. The weight of his words hung between them like a heavy fog. Sarah blinked, her mouth opening as if to respond, but no words came out. David felt a wave of relief wash over him, as if a burden he had carried for months had finally been lifted. He had said it. There was no turning back now. "David, what are you saying?" Sarah finally managed, her voice shaking. David smiled softly, reaching for her hand. "I've been watching you two for a while now, and I want to join you." Sarah stared at him, her face a mix of confusion, fear, and something else David couldn't quite decipher. The silence between them grew heavy, almost suffocating. Slowly, she pulled her hand away, her fingers trembling. "You want to join us?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as though she couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. David nodded, his heart pounding in his chest, though his outward calm remained steady. "Yes," he said quietly, the word hanging in the air like an unspoken truth. "I've been watching for a while, and I don't feel the way I thought I would. I don't feel angry or betrayed. I feel curious. I feel like there's more to this than just an affair, and I want to explore it. With you. And Mark." Sarah's eyes widened, and for a brief moment, David thought she might run, might break down or lash out. But instead, she sat still, her face unreadable. Slowly, she turned away, biting her lip as though weighing the enormity of his words. The tension in the room reached a breaking point, the air thick with uncertainty. This was the moment everything could fall apart, or perhaps something new could begin. After what felt like an eternity, Sarah finally spoke. "I don't know what to say." Her voice was small, fragile. She looked at David, searching his face for some reassurance. "How long have you known?" David exhaled, feeling the truth pour out like a long-held secret. "A few months," he admitted. "I followed you once to the hotel, and then I started watching, setting up cameras. I know it sounds insane, but once I started, I couldn't stop. I had to know everything." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes filling with shock and disbelief. "You set up cameras?" she gasped, shaking her head, struggling to comprehend what he was saying. "You've been spying on me?" David leaned forward, his voice soft but firm. "I didn't do it to hurt you. I just needed to understand. I needed to know what was happening between you and Mark, and the more I watched, the more I realized it wasn't about you betraying me. It was about something else, something I can't explain, but something I need to explore." Sarah leaned back, her eyes wide with uncertainty. "I don't know if Mark would," she began, but David interrupted her. "I'll talk to Mark," he said confidently, as though that were the simplest part of all this. "But first, I need to know where you stand. Are you open to this, to all of us together?" Sarah's breath caught again, her gaze locking with his. "David, this is crazy," she said, shaking her head. "I don't even know what to think." He reached for her hand again, this time with more conviction. "I know it sounds crazy, but I've seen how you look at him, how the two of you are together, and I'm not angry anymore. I'm curious. I want to understand. I want to be part of it, and I think maybe you do too." Sarah's expression softened, her fingers gently tightening around his. For the first time since this conversation began, David saw the tension in her face ease, replaced by something almost like relief. She glanced down at their joined hands, then back at him, her lips parting slightly. "You really want this?" David nodded, his voice firm. "I do. I want to try it." Sarah closed her eyes for a brief moment, taking a deep breath before exhaling slowly. When she opened them again, her gaze was steady, her decision made. "Okay," she said softly. "Let's talk to Mark." The days that followed felt surreal to David. He had anticipated fear, guilt, or even shame to settle in as the reality of his proposal took shape. But instead, what he felt was something entirely different. A sense of liberation, of excitement. This was new territory, something far beyond anything he had ever envisioned, and the idea of it filled him with an electric thrill. When he finally met with Mark, the conversation unfolded almost too smoothly. They met at their usual bar, and after a few drinks, David cautiously brought up the topic. Mark's initial reaction was one of shock, followed by a long, tense silence. But as David continued, explaining the months of observation, of watching, and ultimately, his desire to join them, something in Mark's expression shifted. "Are you serious?" Mark asked, his voice low, disbelief laced through his words. David nodded. "I've never been more serious. I'm not here to break this up, Mark. I just want to understand it, to be part of it, if you're open to that." Mark took a slow sip of his drink, his eyes never leaving David's. The silence between them grew heavy, the tension palpable. Finally, Mark set his glass down, leaned back in his chair, and let out a long breath. "All right," he said, his voice calm. If this is really what you want, I'm in. And just like that, the door had been opened. The night they all came together for the first time was unlike anything David had imagined. The air in the room was thick with tension, almost suffocating, as they sat in the living room. Each of them was keenly aware of the line they were about to cross. Sarah sat next to David, her fingers nervously twisting a strand of hair, while Mark sat across from them, his face unreadable. For a while, no one spoke, the silence hanging over them like a heavy weight. David's heart pounded, a mix of excitement and uncertainty swirling within him. He had pushed them to this moment, but now that it was here, doubts flickered in his mind. Would this destroy everything? Would he regret it the moment they crossed that line? Or would it unlock something new? Something he hadn't realized he was searching for? Sarah was the first to break the silence. So what now? Her voice was soft, hesitant, as she looked between David and Mark. The unspoken question hung in the air. How do we start? David glanced at her, then at Mark, his mind racing to find the right words. He had been the one to bring them to this point, the one who had urged them into this unknown space. Now it was up to him to guide them forward. We take it slow, David said quietly, his voice calm despite the whirlwind of emotions inside him. We don't have to rush, we just see how it feels. Mark leaned back, a faint smile touching his lips. You really want this, David? His tone wasn't mocking, but there was a lingering disbelief, as if he still couldn't fully comprehend that David was sitting there, asking for this. David nodded. I do. And it was true. As strange as it felt, as out of place as the situation seemed, deep down, David knew that this was what he wanted. The curiosity that had consumed him for months, the dark pull that had driven him to observe, to follow, to obsess, all led to this moment. And now he was ready. The first touch was tentative. Sarah reached out, her hand brushing against David's knee, as if testing the boundaries. David felt a shiver run through him, not out of fear, but from something deeper, something raw and unfiltered. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the years of familiarity, the comfort of their marriage, seemed to dissolve, replaced by something new, something dangerous. Mark watched them closely, his gaze steady, waiting for a silent cue to join. David nodded, and with that, Mark leaned forward, his hand resting gently on Sarah's other leg. The energy in the room shifted, the air heavy with a new intensity that David had never felt before. It was as though they were stepping off the edge into the unknown, and there was no turning back. What followed was a blur of sensations, emotions tangled in ways David couldn't fully comprehend. He watched as Sarah responded to Mark's touch, her body reacting in ways he hadn't seen in years. Yet instead of jealousy or anger, David felt something entirely different, a profound sense of liberation. By relinquishing control, he had gained something deeper, something unspoken. He wasn't just watching anymore, he was part of it. Every movement, every whisper, every glance exchanged felt like a choreographed dance, one they had unknowingly been rehearsing for months. As the night unfolded, the lines between them blurred, until there was no longer a distinction between husband, wife, and friend. They were all simply together. When it ended, the room was quiet once again, the intensity slowly fading like a receding tide. Sarah lay between them, her breathing soft and even, her face serene in a way David hadn't seen in a long time. Mark sat on the edge of the couch, his expression thoughtful, yet calm. David stared up at the ceiling, his mind swirling with thoughts he couldn't yet untangle. What had just happened? And more importantly, what did it mean for the three of them going forward? He didn't feel regret. That was what surprised him most. He had expected guilt, a wave of shame. But instead, there was only a sense of peace, of contentment. They had crossed a line, but instead of breaking them, it had brought them closer. In the days that followed, what had happened that night wasn't just a one-off occurrence. It became part of their lives, an unspoken agreement that settled between them. Mark continued to visit, but the dynamic had shifted. There was no longer any need for secrecy or sneaking around. For David, that was the most liberating part. He no longer had to watch from the sidelines, no longer had to wonder what was happening when he wasn't around. He was fully immersed in it. The jealousy he had feared never materialized. Instead, he found himself drawn deeper into this new reality, where the lines between love, desire, and possession were constantly shifting and evolving. But as the days passed, David couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed within him. The man he had been before, the steady husband, the father who took pride in control and predictability, felt distant now, like a figure from another life. He had stepped into a world where boundaries no longer existed, where the rules of marriage and relationships didn't apply in the same way anymore. That thought excited him, but it also left him with a lingering question. Who was he becoming? The curiosity that had first led him to watch had transformed into something far more complex, something he couldn't fully understand. David had embraced this new version of himself, but deep down, he couldn't help but wonder how far it would go, and what it would cost him in the end. His life had shifted in ways he could never have imagined. The nights with Sarah and Mark became part of their routine, slipping into their lives as easily as everything else. What once felt like a forbidden thrill now seemed almost normal. The boundaries that once defined his marriage and sense of self had completely eroded. Yet, with each passing night, the satisfaction that David once found in watching, in participating, began to fade. The excitement that had driven him was now replaced with something else. A hollowness that gnawed at him, leaving him restless. The quiet moments after their nights together, the stillness, were filled with an emptiness he couldn't quite name. He thought back to the beginning. Back then, the thrill of voyeurism, the excitement of discovery, had consumed him. But now, as he lay in bed at night, staring at the ceiling while Sarah slept peacefully beside him, the thrill was gone. All that remained was a void. The question that had lingered in the back of his mind for months now came crashing forward. What now? He had crossed every line, indulged every impulse, but standing on the other side, he felt nothing. The power, the control he thought he had gained had vanished. The jealousy, the anger, they were gone too, replaced by a strange, suffocating numbness. He found himself pulling away, emotionally, mentally, from both Sarah and Mark. Even during their time together, David's mind would drift, no longer captivated by the sight of them. Instead, he would stare out the window, wondering how he had ended up so detached from his own life. How had he gone from obsession to indifference? One evening, after Mark had left and Sarah had gone to bed, David stayed up, sitting alone in the dark living room, nursing a drink. The house was quiet, save for the occasional creak of the floorboards. He stared at the blank TV, lost in thought, trying to pinpoint the moment when everything had shifted. He had once felt so in control, watching everything, knowing everything. But now that he had fully embraced it, he realized how powerless he truly was. His marriage, his friendship, his very identity had all twisted into something unrecognizable. And now, he didn't know how to return to the man he once was. He couldn't undo what had been done. There was no going back to the simplicity of not knowing. He had thrown himself into this new reality, and now he was drowning in it. The next morning, as Sarah sat across from him at the breakfast table, sipping her coffee, David looked at her and saw the same woman he had always loved. But something was different. She was still his wife, still the mother of his children, but the intimacy between them had changed in ways that could not be reversed. She smiled at him, the same soft smile she always gave, but it no longer held the same warmth. It was as though they were both pretending, playing the roles of their former lives, even though they both knew those lives were gone. "You're quiet today," Sarah said gently, breaking the silence. David forced a smile, shaking his head. "Just thinking," he replied, his tone distant. He wasn't ready to say what was really on his mind. Not yet. But the realization was there, looming like a dark cloud. That evening, as they sat together in the living room, David finally broke the silence. "Sarah," he said softly, his voice steady but heavy with the weight of his thoughts. She looked at him, sensing the seriousness in his tone. "What is it?" she asked. David hesitated, searching for the right words. "I don't think I can do this anymore," he said quietly. The words hung between them, sinking in slowly. Sarah's expression shifted, her eyes widening with surprise. Do what? She asked, though she already knew the answer. David sighed, running a hand through his hair, feeling the tension inside him. This, Mark, everything, he said, his voice low. I thought it was what I wanted. I thought it would give me something, but now I don't know who I am anymore. I feel like I've lost myself. Sarah's face softened, her eyes filled with a mix of understanding and sadness. David, she started, but he shook his head gently, cutting her off. It's not your fault, he said quickly. I'm the one who pushed for this. I'm the one who wanted to see how far we could go. But now that we've gone there, I don't think I can keep doing it. I need to find myself again. I need to figure out who I am without all of this. Sarah looked down at her hands, silent for a long moment. I understand, she finally whispered, her voice barely audible. I felt it too. The change, the distance. She looked up at him, tears welling in her eyes. What do we do now? David stared at her, feeling the weight of her question pressing down on him. He didn't have an answer. For so long, he had been driven by the thrill of their secret, by the allure of something new. But now, standing on the other side, all he saw was the wreckage it had left behind. I don't know, he admitted quietly, but I think we need to take a step back. We need to figure out who we are without Mark, without all of this. Sarah nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks as she reached for his hand. I don't want to lose you, David, she said softly, her voice trembling. I don't want to lose us. David gently squeezed her hand, his heart heavy. I don't want to lose us either, he whispered. But we need to find ourselves again. We need to rebuild. Together. As silence settled over them, David knew that this was the beginning of something new. Not a return to their old life, but the start of something different. Something real.
I couldn't pull away, and my senses began to shift again. I watched as they kissed, as Jason touched her body, as she responded to him with passion. Instead of pulling out and making them stop, I stayed watching. In Willowbrook, a small American town where the days flowed calmly and measuredly, my life was a perfect bliss. Sarah and I had met while at university, and from the first time we met, there was something special between us. She was an amazingly beautiful woman, with burning eyes and sensual lips. She had that magic that attracts the eyes of all men. Our first years were full of attraction, passion, and falling in love. We spent a lot of time walking through parks and beaches, telling each other our fondest dreams and desires. I realized that Sarah was the woman of my dreams, and when the time came, I proposed to her. Our wedding was a true fairy tale where every detail was imbued with our love and passion. However, as time went on, routine and daily life began to creep into our lives. We became immersed in work, we had financial worries, and our work schedules began to separate us. Sarah spent more time with her girlfriends. I was consumed with my career. We were at a point where the passion was gone and monotony took its place. Everything changed the day I accidentally came home from work earlier than I had planned. I wanted to surprise her, but the surprise was for me. I saw her, my Sarah, in the arms of my best friend, Jason. The storm of feelings that started inside me was something unimaginable: anger, disappointment, but most importantly, curiosity. I couldn't look away, and my feelings began to shift again. I watched as they kissed, as Jason touched her body, as she responded to him with passion. Instead of pulling away and making them stop, I stayed watching. At first, it was pure curiosity. I wanted to understand what was pushing my wife to cheat, what feelings she was experiencing. Gradually, my feelings of anger and frustration gave way to something else. I began to see her not as a wife cheating on me, but as a woman with turbulent feelings and desires. It was like solving a puzzle. With each new peek, my feelings became more complicated. I couldn't take my eyes off Sarah, couldn't separate my eyes from this woman. Every time she changed her passions in front of another man, I saw something amazing in her, something that changed, blossomed before my eyes. I could see her sighing, her skin getting goosebumps, her skin glistening in the rays of attraction. At first I felt resentment, wondering how she could have cheated on me like that. But gradually, the feelings of frustration were replaced by something much more complex. My wife became a mystery to me, even though I had known her all my life. I tried to understand what she was feeling, what forces were pushing her to cheat. I looked into her eyes, and my own feelings began to change. I began to see not only cheating, but passion, desire, sincerity. I saw her opening herself up to other men, giving herself over to her feelings, and surprisingly, I could not remain indifferent to this sight. My feelings became more and more complex and contradictory. I watched Sarah fall into passion as she lost herself in the arms of other men, and I was not only not offended by it, but attracted to it. I saw how she found pleasure in it, how it brought her fulfillment, and my love for her grew stronger. I couldn't contain my feelings. I wanted to observe her, to understand what drove her to do such things and what feelings she had. My wife became a mystery to me, and I decided to solve this mystery. I soon realized that my love for her was stronger than ever. I couldn't stop watching her. We discussed our feelings and desires, and it turned out that she was experiencing something similar as well. We decided that cheating and watching had become part of our intimate lives. Thus began our new chapter, where we were able to open the doors to each other into a world of passion and attraction, where the feelings of love were stronger than ever. We realized that love can be mysterious and unpredictable, but it can overcome any challenge. It was our journey of understanding, reconciliation, of renewed passion that allowed us to move past cheating and strengthen our relationship. We moved to a new stage in our lives where passion and attraction became an unshakable part of our history together. We did not hide our desires and fears, but rather shared them openly. This became a source of endless inspiration for us. We realized that love is a complex and multifaceted feeling, and it can be expressed in different ways. Our experience became a kind of exploration of human emotions and feelings. We got to know each other again, discovering new sides of our personalities and passions. Our days became brighter, our nights became hotter, and our bonds strengthened. We experienced cheating, and it brought us something we never would have expected. We realized that love and passion can reside alongside cheating, and this story became part of our unique love. And now, as I think back on this period of our lives, I realize that sometimes we need to let our feelings lead us, opening new horizons in love. Our experience changed us, making our relationship stronger than ever. We enriched each other, gaining a deeper understanding of our feelings and passions. This story is about how we survived cheating and how love proved stronger than all barriers. Our hearts beat in unison, and we are ready to go through any trials together. We found the freedom to be ourselves while being closer to each other than ever before. This story is about how love can overcome everything, including betrayal, and remain eternal. When I entered the house, I heard voices from the bedroom. My heart raced, and I headed in that direction. What I saw stunned me. Emily was embracing my friend David. Their kisses were passionate, and I couldn't look away. My initial desire was to separate them, but suddenly I felt something holding me back. Instead of an explosion, I remained in place, observing this unexpected scene. My feelings began to change dramatically. Jealousy and disappointment gave way to something I couldn't understand. I saw Emily and David fall into passion, and it drew me in rather than repelled me. My reactions were unpredictable and contradictory. Mysterious awakening. My life seemed ordinary and predictable until something happened that turned it upside down. My name is Jason, and I lived in a small American town where days flowed calmly and measuredly. My life was perfect. I had a career, a home, and a beautiful wife, Emily. Emily and I met in college, and from the first moment we met, I knew there was something special between us. She was a beautiful woman with mysterious eyes and sensual lips. Our first years were full of passion and falling in love. We spent days walking through parks and beaches, sharing our dreams and desires. I realized that Emily was the woman of my dreams. When the time came, I proposed to her. Our wedding was a true fairy tale where every detail was infused with our love and passion. But as time went on, routine and daily life began to creep into our lives. We became immersed in work, had financial worries, and our schedules began to separate us. Emily spent more time with her girlfriends, and I was consumed with my career. The passion and attraction disappeared, replaced by monotony.